When you are the moon, the best for you can be is a full moon. And then a half moon is alright. But the full moon is the famous moon. And like 3/4, no one gives a shit about him. When does he come? 2 days into the calendar month is useless. Full moon, the main moon.
Hi, and welcome to The Seeker
and The Skeptic.
I'm Kat, and I'm the flaky, unpredictable, maybe a bit irrational Seeker.
And I'm Rebecca. I'll be your sarcastic, grumpy, close-minded, skeptical host. Or maybe we should just be ourselves.
Sounds good to me. This podcast is going to dive deep into the controversial topics that some may call New Age, or woo-woo, or just plain foolish.
And hopefully look at them with a skeptical but open-minded approach that will encourage understanding and acceptance from both the skeptics
and the seekers. This episode, we're talking about one of my top 3 heavenly bodies, the moon.
I'm not even going to ask what the other two are.
Well, since you didn't ask, they're the sun and Jupiter.
Oh, you're making her jealous. Stop.
Don't worry, listeners. We were up late last night honouring the moon and chugging cacao, so she knows we're committed.
So people have had strange ideas about the moon ever since we first noticed it, which I'm pretty sure was probably before we were even human, right? Imagine, just like our early human ancestors, there was literally nothing to do at night apart from stare at the moon and I guess like dance and sing and talk to each other. But which would you prefer? Obviously staring at the moon.
Moon gazing.
Yeah. And moonlight was super important to them too, because if you wanted to hunt or if you wanted to defend yourself against predators, it's easier when the moon is full, obviously. And different cultures have sort of taken the whole idea of the moon being important to them and run in lots of different directions. We're going to get into some gods and goddesses of the moon and different ideas primitive people have had about the moon and people still have today. But what I find really interesting is if you just take a look at the moon, everyone from our culture is told there's a man in the moon, you can see the face there, but different cultures see different things. There's rabbits, there's buffaloes, there's all sorts of strange things that people have imagined that they're seeing when they stare at this moon for long enough. It's a classic thing. It's like, what's it called? Apophenia, when you see patterns in random noise. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah,
apophenia.
I've always had that and I thought I was special, but I guess not.
It's faces. In fact, It might be apophenia is specifically for faces and pareidolia is the general one. I can't remember which way around they go.
Listeners, tell us if...
Yeah, please tweet us now. But anyway, so people normally see faces. So seeing the face of the man in the moon kind of makes sense. So yeah, it's used in some of the oldest calendars, which is interesting, but also kind of makes sense because it's much easier to see what shape the moon is than to measure like really quite imperceptible changes to the length of day. So anyway, the point is it's been important to all sorts of cultures all over the world for a long, long time. And then more recently, there's countless conspiracy theories about it. But we're going to save talking about the moon landing and all that stuff for another episode.
I'll take off my tinfoil hat then.
No, keep it on. It suits you.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment, but I will take it.
Anyway, how did the moon make it into your top 3?
Well, as a seeker, the moon is quite key to my newfound love of astrology. The moon and the sun are a kind of duo that act as the foundation of just pretty much all of what I'm specifically learning about astrology, at least the traditional way. And most people know their star sign, which is actually where the sun is when you're born, what sign the sun is in. But less people know that you also have a moon sign.
Oh, yeah, I had no idea.
And I think it's more popular in the East, maybe with Vedic or Indian astrology. But anyway, there's a lot of interesting philosophy attached to this kind of sun and moon dynamic, yin, yang, which quite easily turns into masculine and feminine, and you can get into some weird territory there. But I found that since learning about this and how foundational this sun-moon dynamic is, I find it hard not to tack it on to like even conversations that we're having. Earlier today, we were having a conversation and I was like, that's so solar.
Yeah.
And that's so lunar. And
I'm never sure whether you're just doing that naturally or you're just doing it to piss me off.
No, I've broken my brain. So the moon is an interesting one. You can't talk about her, referred to as a she, at least in astrology, without talking about the feminine, which I do find to be a kind of a curiosity. And it's going to be something that maybe we touch on a bit today, but I find that difficult.
It is weird because why is the moon feminine?
Right, exactly.
Like when people start trying to explain to you why the moon's feminine, they'll say things like, "Well, it's very passive, it's very quiet," and you're like, "Shut up."
Well, it's the weird territory you get into. So another thing is like that it's always changing and it's fluctuating, and it's like, well, you're trying to say I'm mental then?
How dare you?
So you kind of
suddenly you get irrationally angry.
Exactly, and it's a bit silly, but anyway. That's might all be to do with where the moon is in my chart. That would explain it. So tell me, what's your experience with the moon?
Well, the moon is a big deal in Wicca, and as an ex-Wiccan, so the moon is like, in fact, generally Wiccans get together at the full moon. They're not the big festivals, so there's 8 big festivals in the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, but there's Esabats, which are like mini get-togethers, generally a lot more casual. So it's a time for getting together with your fellow witches. That's what it was to me when I was a teenager anyway. And often the god and the goddess of Wicca, many Wiccans, not all Wiccans, hashtag not all Wiccans, but many Wiccans worship a god and a goddess. And sometimes they will see those more as metaphors, and sometimes they're more real, and there's lots to be said about that. But go back to our Wicca episode. But anyway, often the goddess is represented as the triple moon goddess. So that's the goddess of the waxing moon, so the moon that's getting bigger, the goddess of the full moon, and then the goddess of the waning moon, which is the moon that's getting smaller. Okay. So that idea of the triple goddess was big to me. But as a skeptic, my only real interaction with the moon is this constant refrain of like, everyone goes crazy at the full moon.
And the moon makes women have a period at a certain time. It's like, my dad told me that, and I was like, Dad, let's not have this conversation.
Please, no. Someone said that to me at the cacao ceremony.
So annoying.
Yeah, saying about how, of course, as women, we're very in tune with the moon because our periods. I'm like, no.
And also mine isn't 28 days, so
yeah. Well, no, I can't remember what the average is for a woman's menstrual cycle, but it's not the same as the moon.
No,
so no one, I mean, obviously there is someone who's lucky enough to be synced up with the moon. Please call us. Please tweet us, please contact us if your menstrual cycle is completely psyched up with the moon. Right. I'm very jealous. That would be very handy. But yeah, the idea that people go crazy at the full moon, like there's people always say, A&Es are more busy around that, or the police cells are always full, and it's just not
true. And even doctors think this.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like the idea is out there, and then people go around looking for confirming evidence. That's what confirmation bias is, right? And because the idea is so popular in like our folk consciousness or whatever you want to call it, everyone would look for any example and then use that to prove their point. But weirdly, scientists have actually wasted their time studying this. And yeah, it doesn't stack up. If you look at the accident reports, hospital reports, all these things. There's even an article called The Lunar Effect on Wikipedia. I'll link it in the show notes, which goes through this in detail. It's just not true, but the myth will never die. I don't know why.
My this podcast will help just convince like 3 people, maybe.
Even the Seeker doesn't believe in the lunar effect.
You didn't let me.
My other experience with the moon is when I used to work in a bookshop years ago, in my early 20s. I was in charge of the New Age self-help section. I think it was called the Mind, Body, Spirit section, and I loved it. It was quite a small section, so it was very manageable and great fun. And there was an amazing book there amongst all the other books called Who Built the Moon?
Amazing.
And I never read this book, but I recommended it aggressively to anyone who came into my section because I thought the title was so funny. I had a quick Google. I still haven't read the book, but I had a quick Google, so I know a bit more about it. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand with the moon. And I was thinking, when we were thinking about, we want to do a show about the moon, but what experience are we going to have? It's quite hard to think of an experience related to the moon. But then you happen to see this cacao ceremony advertised.
Yeah, it was, so it kind of wrapped together 2 things that I was interested in experiencing. Cacao ceremonies, so that was something I'd been kind of researching. But it was also billed as a cacao full moon ceremony. And I think, listeners, you might know by now, we're in the kind of the hippie capital of the UK, Brighton. And I think full moon ceremonies are fairly common. You could probably find full moon ceremonies that don't involve cacao as well. But that was, I thought, a good way for us to do a bit of both.
Yeah, what were you expecting? Because one of the things that I was expecting when you first said it, I was assuming it was going to be outdoors.
Okay.
Because I thought we'd need to see the moon.
I thought we might go outdoors. I thought just because it's cold, we wouldn't.
Yeah.
I was obviously biased towards thinking about the astrology. I was like, maybe this person will say something, even if they're not like really into the astrology thing, they'll say something that it's a Gemini full moon, and there might be a little story about that.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, you know, I've done, let's just say, circles before where, you know, somebody gives you a tarot card, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody gives you a rune. I thought there's just going to be something other than cacao, I guess.
Yeah, because it did feel a bit just like a cacao ceremony that happened to be happening at the full moon.
Yes, yeah. The cacao itself, I mean, my expectations of that was, if you've ever had one of those really thick hot chocolates that I think they only exist in Europe. I've never had them anywhere else. And
where it's just melted chocolate.
Yeah, but it's like, it's this thickness. And you can actually get something similar at Cafe Nero. So listeners, go out. If you're in the UK, go and get a hot chocolate Milano. It's like that. But I would imagine that without the sugar is what we were going to get.
I think, yeah, I don't know. I knew it was going to be not sweet.
Yeah, I knew
because
that.
I've been tricked by these hippies before when they're like offering you chocolate and you're like, oh, delicious chocolate. And you pick it up and it's just like, it doesn't really have much flavour and it's kind of hard and grainy.
Sure.
So I wasn't too excited about what this is going to taste like.
I like the flavour.
Yeah, it's
just
fine.
Missing something.
But it's just like if you're expecting chocolate, it's a bit disappointing.
Sure, yeah.
So we walk on over there and we see the moon on our way.
Yeah, I tried to get a picture of it. Bit cloudy, bit crap.
Yeah, check our Instagram. Maybe we'll put it up.
It's too bad.
Is it too bad?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame. Maybe we'll get another picture of the moon some other time to share with you.
I'll just get one of like iStock photo or something.
But it was beautiful. Like it just peeked out from between the clouds for a second and then went back away. So I was glad we at least saw it. And then we arrive and it's in a community centre.
Yeah. And they just had a Krav Maga class.
Yeah.
So the room was like really sweaty and smelly.
It went quite quickly. As soon as they started burning incense, the
That's
Krav
true.
Maga smell dissipated.
This is true.
But it really wasn't, I mean, it didn't feel particularly, it felt like a community centre.
Yeah, and those like bright lights. Yeah, it's like a hall, like an embarrassing hall. They had a nice Christmas tree though.
That's true.
Just to kind of give away when we recorded this episode.
The bright lights were bright,
Yes.
but they had a solution for this.
I didn't really understand this whole thing. So
I didn't understand what they were doing at first. I
Yeah.
thought that it was something to do with smoke detectors. So the shaman, Ricardo, we'll introduce him in a minute, but it was pretty much the first time we see him, is sort of balancing on a chair, trying to reach up and put a sock over some kind of device
and
on
you
the ceiling.
cleverly said like, oh yeah, it's like probably to stop the smoke from the incense setting off the fire alarm,
Yeah.
which is kind of silly, right? Because we both know that probably isn't going to happen.
Yeah, well, we burn incense all the time and
Yeah.
our fire alarms never go off. So, but I thought, oh, maybe these people think that. Anyway,
Yeah.
but it turns out what he's doing is blocking the motion detectors
Yeah.
because in this hall, the lights come on whenever they sense motion. And obviously you don't want to do a cacao ceremony in bright fluorescent halogen bulbs.
Right, they got that right. Yeah.
So we got these two socks hanging from the ceiling. And the other people, when we're getting a little bit late because the Krav Maga ran over and we're all sort of setting up. How many people would you say there?
18, you told me. you counted, and then I didn't want to count because that would mean looking everyone in the eye as I went around the room. And I didn't want to do
That's
that.
the only way you can count.
I was just staring at my toes.
Yeah, so 18
it's a big room.
people. Yeah, 3 men and all the rest women, if I
Sure,
remember rightly.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not counting Ricardo.
No, you're not. There were 3 other men.
3 other men other
Plus
than
Ricardo.
Ricardo. Okay, so 4 men.
And we were told, this is kind of inconvenient, but we were told to bring yoga mats or the equivalent, blankets, and I think some like maybe water or something. We definitely didn't really need yoga mats. I would have been happy if I was just on the floor. Like, what did you think? Did you think the yoga mat really helped you in this situation? Because there wasn't enough room really to lie
No, there
down.
wasn't enough room for it. I think if there had been enough room, it would have been nice to have a yoga mat, but you didn't really need
I think
it.
a cushion would have been better. I think if you told me to bring a cushion and a blanket, I would have been happier.
But I did find myself lying down at points in the ceremony. So
you were in
I did
child's
appreciate
pose. You were like in tree pose. No, you weren't doing that.
So Ricardo, is he in his 20s? Handsome guy.
Yeah,
He
he's
said he was
Mexican,
from Mexico,
and he had
yeah.
a very brilliant mohawk, a bit like a very short one.
Yeah, like right at the front.
I just really
went
wanted
from
to
his
like
hairline,
stroke
like 4
it.
inches back.
Perfect, and he had some interesting facial hair. I think he had a beard, a goatee.
Yeah, and then just normal man clothes, but with like a little shawl draped over.
Yeah, it was a good look.
And his socks were really cool. Did you notice?
Odd. I wanted to say it to you, but I knew it would be too loud. They were odd socks. Were they Christmassy?
I don't know what one of them. Why do you have to keep bringing up Christmas? What's your obsession with Christmas? No, I don't think. I thought they were Christmassy too, and then I was like, "Oh, they're Christmassy. That's a shame. We can't mention it on the podcast because we're not releasing it at Christmas."
It doesn't matter. No one cares.
But now the cat's out of the bag. This is not live. But yeah, they were one of them. I couldn't identify the other one, but I did get a good gawp at one of the socks, and it had little UFOs on with like a little beaming up thing.
Nice.
So that was cool.
Oh, we should have talked to him about ancient aliens or something. Okay.
So there was him and a woman whose name I can't remember, but I'm going to call Katinka.
Just around, not even like Jane.
No, she had a name that sounded a bit like that. It had like a couple of repetitive syllables. Oh, I really can't remember. Anyway, she was his helper.
Yes.
And when we came into the sort of hallway, because the Krav Maga class was still going on, we came to the hallway, she immediately like greeted us and hugged us and made us feel welcome.
And not over the top. It wasn't like with holotropic breathing, listeners, if you remember that, and how disturbed I was by the big hug that I was greeted with before she even asked my name. This wasn't like that. I thought she did a good job of greeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Like, I think she could get away with hugging anyone.
Who? This one?
Yeah,
this one could
Katinka.
have, but she had a nice way about her. She wasn't overly in your space.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying though. Like, because of her energy,
her aura, obviously
her
aura. Yes.
Yeah, she could do things that other people you'd be like, oh, why are you hugging me? But she's hugging you, like, yeah, all right, I'm going with it.
And the setup. So there was something happening in the center of the circle, which was, I guess there was a blanket, a drum. What else did they have?
Big thermoses.
Yes, and the thing that I recognized from ayahuasca ceremonies is that agua de Florida water.
Yeah.
And I got excited when I saw that because it's like my favorite smell. So we had that. And
what were the other people like? I'm just trying to think. I mean, we said that they were mainly women.
Oh, yeah.
There was one of the guys was wearing a poncho.
Yeah, and then there was another guy who was wearing like shaman vibe clothes. Like you wouldn't necessarily wear it to work. It wasn't like the opposite of a business suit.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a waistcoat. So he looked quite shamany.
And then the young hot one was wearing like prayer beads.
Yeah.
And like
it's almost like
disheveled longer hair.
We had all of the stereotypes, I feel. And remember the one woman that I really liked who was sitting on the sheepskin rug. She was like classic Brighton, like older spiritual lady, but doesn't sound spiritual. She was great. I liked her. Then there was like just a bunch of like young women, basically.
Yeah, it was
maybe
mainly
around
our
our age, if we can call ourselves young. But like,
I think we can.
I think we have this conversation on every podcast.
Some millennial women such as ourselves.
Yes, basically everyone's a millennial apart from maybe some of the older guys and a handful of the women.
Yeah, and we got to meet them pretty soon. Well, not all of them.
Sharing.
Because that's the first thing Ricardo asked us to do. He said, turn to the person next to you, and we were like, yes.
Can
and
I
he was
just
like,
say,
not someone you already know.
Yeah, but can I just say that that's my worst thing. In any group situation, I don't mind sharing out loud to the group. What I hate doing is doing the turn to the person to the right or to the left of you. That's the thing that gets me, which is really weird because I like talking one-to-one with people. But my problem is you can only do small talk in that time. But by the time you get to anything serious, you have to break up the little chat. It's pointless.
I think that's the whole point, is like to say, because the question we were supposed to talk about with the person next to us was, why are you here?
Yeah, that was it.
So it's like supposed to immediately drop you into deep talk. Like you don't have to go, hi, I'm Kat. What do you do for a living?
Maybe that was our mistake.
Isn't the weather nice? You just go, why are you here? That's what I did to Katinka, who was who I was paired up with.
But even with that question, you still have to do the small talk. Now, see, I'm not against small talk because there's a point to it. But if you don't get to the point after the small talk, all you're left with is we still have to spend that time recalibrating. We're calibrating to each other.
Yeah.
And so that's all you get to do in that time. Anyway.
Well, the way you do that is through your body, not through words.
Oh, that's what I was doing wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly the conversation me and Katinka had, because immediately she comes over, sits next to me, hugs me, and then she just like looked in my eyes. I mean, she's like a proto shaman. She's training to do this, so she knows what she's doing. She looked in my eyes and said, here we are.
That's lovely.
It was like, I was like,
here we are, indeed. Yeah. Okay, I want to train under her just to be a better human.
So what did you say to your
I said, what's your name? I thought she said Matt, and then I said, oh, it rhymes with cat. So, we had that. And then I realised later her name was not Matt. It was Mad, short for Madeline. So I didn't even get that right. She must have thought I was a real, like, that's a half rhyme, you fucking idiot. And then we kind of talked a bit about Brighton. We kind of talked about what she was doing. She said a bunch of things like, I'm a health coach / yoga teacher / several other things. I thought,
a slashy.
yeah, and I'm like, so am I. Big fucking deal. Like, it's at no point did we click. There was something about when she was looking at me, it just seemed incredibly uninterested. And no. I did not take well to this.
But what did you say your intention was? Like, why were you there? Or did you not get around to that?
No, she didn't ask me.
Aww.
No, I'm kidding. I don't even think we even did that. I think she said something about like coming back to Brighton and being out of cacao ceremonies for a while. And I was like, this is my first one. What can you say about that other than it's my first one? I want to see what's going to happen. Well,
me and Katinka...
I'm so jealous.
I know. I really, really like this woman. So we talked about... I asked her why she was here, and she said that she's training to do these ceremonies and that she's been working with cacao for a while. And I said, oh, is it the first plant medicine you tried? Because I know all the lingo now.
Yeah, that was good.
And she was like, no, I'd had experiences with ayahuasca, and we talked about that. Me and her had very similar experiences with ayahuasca in that she was basically like blown to pieces, just like I was by ayahuasca. And she said that, you know, she warned me that some of the songs that he'll be singing are the same songs in the ayahuasca ceremony. And the first time she heard them, she started to have flashbacks. So she was like, just to let you know.
It's weird because all shamans have different songs. So that's kind of not true.
I think he led her through, because he also runs ayahuasca
Well, that's
retreats
what I mean.
Mexico.
They would have been the same for her, but not for us. We would have had... And also, we were listening to a fucking, like, Spotify playlist. I just remembered that. Anyway.
Which is weird, because now whenever Xavier Rudd comes on
I
my stereo...
know, that's triggering.
Yeah, deeply triggering. You want to be really careful what you listen to when you're on your ayahuasca experience. Let's not drift back into ayahuasca chat. It happens so easily to us all the time.
I think we're going to have to bring it up in this ceremony, because there were some commonalities.
Yeah. So then we chat, and I say, like, I came here because Kat wanted to come, basically. I didn't say anything about the podcast, but I didn't really think it was super relevant. Yeah. But then she sort of pressed me a bit more, and I said, oh yeah, I guess what I'm hoping to do is to get more in touch with my body.
Nice.
Because I tend to live up in my head a lot, and it would be nice to get in touch with my body, which is kind of vague, but also true.
Well, most people feel the same.
Yeah.
In this day and age. Yeah, brilliant.
And then we went round and did a sharing circle.
Yes. So there was real interesting, diverse, I thought, reasons for being there. I remember that the hot guy said that his dad recently died.
Yeah.
That was sad.
And the woman sitting next to him said that she was here part to celebrate that she just completed her PhD, and that's when the lights suddenly went off.
Yeah,
because obviously the motion detectors
we all started
have
clapping.
Yeah,
that was why. And well, maybe not. Maybe it's just timing. But...
I think it's just time, because with those lights, if they don't see motion for a certain amount of time, they turn off automatically.
Yes.
And it must have been 15 minutes, 10 minutes since he put the socks over.
But it was very cool.
It was dramatic, yeah.
And that was really impressive. And I thought, oh, how nice on a Gemini full moon. Anyway, then was anyone else saying anything interesting?
I'm trying to think what else say. There's a lot of people were talking about getting in touch with their energies. There was lots of talks of energies.
Always the energy.
I was the last person to share, so I was like, I've got to slip the word energy in here and see if I can make Cat crack.
Right. I think what I said, I was trying to like sculpt my answer and make it really profound and say the right thing so I could impress Ricardo, because that's what I do.
Everything is to impress Ricardo.
I said something like, I just want to see what cacao has to show me.
Yeah.
And I just said it like that. No,
and everyone nodded.
It was
yeah,
man. Of course. Like, and just meet it with an open heart.
Oh, that's something he talked about, isn't it? He said... well,
everyone says it's like a heart opening.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Like, everyone has a different experience, but what everyone has in common is it's heart opening. I was like, what does that mean?
Well, I can tell you scientifically what's happening, and this is why it's associated with that. Well, I actually can't, but it's like, there's a chemical in cacao, or it does something that releases a thing. Like, isn't it theobromine? It makes you feel warm and fuzzy. It's just what happens.
Well, why specifically heart?
Because it's something to do with like your circulation and, you know.
Oh, interesting.
You know, the energy.
The energy. I didn't do any research on the science behind this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry, I wish I had now, but there definitely are things about cacao. Like, you know, if you
it's
like
definitely got chemicals in it. That is true. Of literally everything that you eat or drink.
Yes, this is true. But it's like, it's similar to coffee in the sense that, you know, coffee definitely has an effect on how you feel. So does cacao.
Yeah.
Especially you have like a lot of it and it's strong. Anyway. And then you shared yours.
Yeah, I said something along the lines of I want to get more in touch with my body. Yeah. I can't remember exactly what I said.
And you also blamed me.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then we all sort of settled down on our little piles of mats You were
uncomfortable.
leaning against a wall.
Thank God.
I was not. So
Yeah.
I was like, I'd been in the studio all day drawing, so my shoulders have been all hunched up, and I have terrible posture when I draw. So my back was killing me. And I was like, oh no.
See, you looked really like, you looked as if you had great posture, and I was like, oh, Rebecca's a pro. She's
That's because
like,
I was forcing it, because I knew that, like, my tendency to slump, so I have to force myself to sit up straight.
and it was late for us. Like, it's
Very
like
late.
9 p.m. at this point, and
Yeah.
I couldn't have good posture at 9 p.m. Doesn't happen. Body doesn't do that.
Yeah, that was a strong disincentive to go to a cacao ceremony.
Yeah, I
that
won't
it was
be
so
doing that
late.
again.
What is it with all these woo-woo people and their late night antics? Where do they get the energy?
From all the cacao.
Yeah, obviously.
So how did he begin? Did he start doling out the cacao in these lovely thermoses, like big
he
fat
had
thermoses?
two massive
Three,
thermoses.
I think.
Three. Yeah, and he poured into paper cups for everyone. Although I did notice a couple of people who obviously been there before brought their own mugs. Did you see that?
I'd like to do that in the future.
And then he ran out of paper cups when he came to me, so I just drank out the lid of the thermos.
Out of his palm.
I just lapped out of his palm.
The only thing I wish I had. Okay, so going back to my expectations about the cacao, this lovely, thick, viscous. It wasn't like that. It was like having lots of like grit, chocolatey, unsweetened grit in water. No offense, Ricardo, and maybe this is just what cacao. I didn't know that was the case, so I was a bit like, oh.
Yeah, it wasn't as it smelled really good. So when he poured it and I smelled it, I was like, this is going to be amazing. And then as soon as you start to drink it, just all these little bits of grit.
Yeah, a disappointment. And then I just kind of wished I had a spoon, because actually chewing it wasn't so bad. It had like a nice chew to it. So I just wanted a spoon.
That's what Katinka said to me at the end. She was like, oh, what did you think of the actual taste? And I was like, oh, it's okay. And she said, yeah, I love the way it's so chewy. And I was like, oh, no, that's what I hate about it.
But I didn't, then I was like thinking, am I the only one chewing? There were so many things that I didn't expect, which my whole thing about circles like this is that the job of the facilitator is to kind of destroy all of your expectations at the beginning. No, really, so that you know what to expect. That's why I loved the first time I did ayahuasca. Sorry to bring it up again, and I will do several times, but I was really prepared by this little chat I had at the start, and I just really think that that's a standard to go by when you do these things.
Yeah, he literally didn't say anything really, apart from that it was a heart opener.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone can like prepare you for the experience. I'm just saying like some of the physical thing, like the experience of the cacao, I don't need to be told about. Just like the experience of the ayahuasca, I don't need to be told about. But like the drink, what's going to happen throughout the night, stuff like that, I think is helpful.
When we're going to get to go home.
Yeah. And like, what are you going to make us share? Are you going to make me dance? I was scared about having to dance the whole time.
Yeah, so I hadn't really thought about this because this is one of the things you organise. So I just thought, I'll just turn up. So the morning of, I gave a quick Google to see what it was, and almost every person online who'd been blogging about doing cacao ceremonies said that they danced. And I was like, this is really strange. Why has Kat booked us for a dancing thing? She hates dancing.
She wouldn't do that. Yeah. No, I was lucky. I mean, spoiler alert, we didn't have to dance. No one danced. It was fine. But after we had got our first drink.
How was the temperature for you of that drink?
Perfect.
Mine was slightly too hot, and I can still feel my tongue is slightly scalded. Not like,
wow.
Oh my god, it's burnt, but just slightly scalded.
Your first drink was out of the new thermos. Mine had cooled down, maybe. Yeah,
I was very displeased about that because I think that's an important factor.
Yeah, don't serve
because then my whole evening I'm like, it's just very slightly uncomfortable. If it had been worse, I would have like spat it out and gone, made a big fuss. But it wasn't bad enough to make a fuss.
Thrown it.
I never make a big fuss. I wouldn't have made it. I would have suffered in silence. Let's be honest. But yeah, it was just slightly too hot. And also, and I had the same thing. I didn't know whether other people were chewing, and I kept like looking around to see if they were chewing. No one seemed to be chewing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I at one point I could start to hear you chewing, and that relieved me. I was like, oh, thank God. At least Rebecca has no manners.
I was getting my money's worth. I'm not going to let that go to waste.
So next time, listeners, if you go to one of these, bring a spoon. You'll look like a real pro. And then Ricardo picked up the drum.
Yeah, and he just started going for it.
Most beautiful voice. Yeah. I really loved it. Apparently he does singing lessons.
Oh, cool.
I don't know how he's going to teach me how to sing like a Mexican man, but I really want to learn how to do that because it was beautiful. It wasn't like the songs that I've heard in ayahuasca ceremonies before.
Oh, really?
Though he did say, we didn't say this, but his experience is with the Mayan culture, like, because you can still go to Mexico and learn from the original, not the original, but like traditions that have been passed down. Really fascinating stuff. Maybe we do an episode on the Mayans one day.
Oh, that would be cool.
But he's also spent time with, he just said like in South America, different tribes, and I think Shipibo culture as well. So that's where like I experienced ayahuasca for the first time with the Shipibo.
It's really hard to describe the sort of music, isn't it? Maybe we'll put a clip in somewhere at the beginning or the end of the show so you can get a flavour of it, because I don't want to try and do it myself.
No, I'll do a little bit in a bit, because there's a song I remember. And he was singing in Spanish.
Yeah.
Right? So
I assume so. Actually, I don't really
They
know.
might have been made up words. I don't know. No, but
it's a very deep, resonant voice.
Yes.
And
beautiful.
very repetitive.
And it's just like the drum was just boom, but you know, it wasn't anything elaborate. It's like a hand drum.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say is that I was told at the end by Poncho Man, who we'll get into a bit, is that Ricardo's songs, just like in ayahuasca ceremonies, he's kind of creating from our energy.
Oh.
He's sensing the energy of the room, and that's kind of what he's putting back out.
Oh my God, I really felt like, because when we first came in, I was like, let's go into this corner and then we'll be sort of out of the way and safe. I'm thinking. And we put our stuff down in that corner. But then Ricardo came and sat on the other end of my yoga mat.
Yeah.
So like I was
We had to
right
move.
next to him.
Oh, I was thinking,
He was
were you
sitting
getting
on
like
my yoga
deafened?
mat. He was drumming in my face.
I was feeling for you because it was annoying to me at one point. I was like, this is just a bit too loud.
It was just so close, like having someone on a hand drum literally
Yes.
a meter away from you. And I
In
didn't
one
want to
ear,
like
not the
stare at
other.
him, but I felt like he was staring at me. Like
Oh,
something
it was
about
that
my energy
close.
had made him really get into it. It's like, I'm going to drum this
That's
woman.
interesting that you picked that up though, because you probably were like, I honestly mean this, but like you're tuning into that, but you could have just been very close to him.
I was very close to him. And
Yeah.
also, you know, I'm sure Ricardo's a master of reading body language. If he sees that I look uncomfortable, he's going to give me a
Sure.
good drumming until I chill out.
Maybe. Isn't that cool though?
Yeah, it's amazing.
So then the best thing happens. Can we talk about the best thing?
Oh,
so
yeah.
this is like spirit cleaning.
This is about halfway through.
Yeah, it was during our second cut. So we had a second cut while he started doing this thing. He started going around the circle. He called people up to stand up. And the first woman, your Kiki woman, like put her arms out in a kind of like, you know, like Jesus way. You all know what I mean, listeners, right? A Jesus way. And he proceeded to start by singing at her heart.
Yeah, it was amazing. I love that.
And then singing at her face. And then getting these lovely 3 feathers and like dusting her down. And it made the sound of like a bird. And he was singing all the time. And PhD girl was banging the drum. In
Yeah.
just a rhythmic bum, 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 bum,
Yeah.
bum, bum, bum. It was magical.
It was really, really, I loved that bit.
And
And he also had the aqua, what
He
was
did.
it called? Aqua de Florida?
Yes,
Aqua de
and I think
Vida?
he'd taken a swig of it, which I always hate the idea of. But what's great is that it makes your breath smell like perfume. So like when he was singing in your face, it's just like a nice smell.
But he like, when he was singing in your face, he put his hand in front of his mouth. So he
Oh, did he really? My
yeah.
eyes were closed. It was too awkward.
What, didn't you watch other people being done?
Yeah,
though?
it's dark.
My night sight was adjusted and I was seeing everything. Nothing escaped my vision. Studying people's socks, you know. I did notice actually at one point there was a woman who was writing something down and he came over to her and spoke to her and then she put her notebook away.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't hear what was said.
Well, put your fucking notebook away.
Yeah, I think I heard him go whisper and she said something, my journey. I assume she was saying, I'm writing down my journey.
Yeah.
And then he whispered something else and then she put it away. So
Yeah,
I was
fair
like,
enough.
okay, well, it's obviously inappropriate. I'm glad I didn't bring my notebook because I was thinking
Yeah.
I would have liked to take notes for the show. But so he did the thing where he sung to your heart, which I thought was like when someone's talking to a baby in a pregnant woman's
Yeah.
stomach.
There's something weirdly nice about that. And so what this means, listeners, is that you don't have to be pregnant to have that nice thing. Get somebody to talk to your actual heart. It's
Yeah.
the sweetest thing.
It was lovely. And then he did the singing in your face thing with his hand so he didn't spit in your face.
Yeah.
Or maybe there was some spiritual reason for that. Then he did with the the watery stuff.
Did he touch the back of your neck
Yeah.
and kind of pat your head?
Yeah.
There's something ridiculous. Maybe it's like I'm touch deprived, but it's so nice.
No, I'm not touch deprived. Believe me. But it was really nice for me too.
It was so we discussed this on the drive home, non-creepy, and it's so nice to have as a female to have like a man who's being non-creepy and a stranger touching you.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Like it's just such a
very
weird
comforting
thing.
to feel safe. I think like a lot.
Because even doctors are a bit creepy.
Yeah. And like just if a strange man you don't know touches you, it's creepy. Like, it's almost guaranteed to be creepy. So if that can happen but it not be creepy, it's like, what magic is this?
It
How
does
does
feel
he make this
magical.
work? Yeah.
And the bit when he's kind of dusting you down with the feathers, I was like, I wonder what that's going to feel like. And it just felt great. I just really imagined him, and watching him, he did look like a busy little housewife dusting.
Yeah.
It was just a really sincere action, which it takes something. Not everyone can pull that off.
Yeah, it got me thinking about just generally, often people say about, alternative medicine and stuff, that the important thing is just having someone pay attention to you for a little while. And that's why people enjoy it, and that's why they keep coming back, because often in the case of alternative medicine, the actual medicine doesn't have any active ingredients. It doesn't do anything in itself. But the relationship between you and the caregiver is so much more intimate than it would be with like your GP or whatever. And I was thinking, now I have a sort of sense of what that is like, because it's so nice to be sort of tended to.
Yeah.
He's like you say, he's very sincere. He's genuinely trying to help cleanse you, and that's all he said. He didn't say anything about auras or energy. He just said, "I'm cleansing
about
you."
Those, like, I think the idea is that you might have these spirits and stuff like that, so you can kind of like dust them away. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that doing it justice, because there's more to it. But there is something like that. Like, there is a real physical idea in a lot of these traditions that you are really getting rid of the bad stuff. But you're right, he didn't bring that into it.
He just let us have our own interpretations,
exactly,
which was really nice. Yeah, and made me not feel alienated. Because as soon as you start talking your hippie talk, I'm like, oh no, really?
Yeah, like, I've just dusted Gary off you.
Oh, he was a nightmare, that one. Took me ages to dust him off.
But yeah, there was just pleasantness.
Yeah, that was really nice. So we went around and did that for everyone in turn. And then we were back to drinking more. And did you have any, like, I didn't really know what to expect, because you sent me that email or whatever, the message saying, don't eat or drink. Yeah. No, maybe just eat for 2 hours before. Don't have coffee on that day. All these things. And that's the point when I thought, oh, actually, maybe this is, because I was just thinking, oh, this is a nice hot chocolate that I'm going to be having with some hippies. But when you sent me that, I was like, oh, actually, maybe this is going to affect me in some way. Maybe this is going to be like a mild high. Did you have anything like that?
Okay, so I definitely felt like pretty quickly in my first cup, I felt a warmth sensation throughout my body, particularly my arms. Yeah. So I definitely did. It was like similar to when I have my first cup of coffee in the morning. I have a physical effect. Yeah. I have a physical reaction. And this was like that, but without that kind of the buzz. Yeah. But it was definitely a warm fuzz. So not a buzz, but warm fuzz. And it was good. And I was like, oh, I could totally do this. If I had a strong cup of hot chocolate, it would make me feel exactly like this.
Which is funny, because Katinka specifically said at the beginning that it wasn't like hot chocolate.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, it's the same. No, maybe I don't know enough about the details of it. I'm not sure if it's possible that it's raw cacao.
Yeah, I think it is
that's
raw.
Different. And obviously, it's just like 100%. I've had 100% raw cacao before.
Not to brag.
And I think you could, those cacao nibs.
Yeah.
You could probably grind them up a little bit, boil them in some hot water, and you'd probably have something similar.
Yeah, I might actually give that a go if I could actually get them to melt, because I really didn't. Or maybe you could just filter out the gritty bits.
This is it, because the actual liquid of it. Because remember, I had to add some water to mine. He suggested. It was very thick, and that was quite nice. Yeah. It wasn't just like, like powdered hot chocolate. Yeah.
I don't think I had any physical. I mean, yeah, I don't think I really had any physical reaction. But then again, I don't to coffee either. I mean, I do. I know I do, because if I don't have coffee, I'm like an insane person. But when I drink my first coffee of the day, I don't feel it. Maybe I'm so out of touch with my body.
Well, I don't think I've always felt it. I do think it takes some like tuning in. I honestly do. I think you have to know what to look out for. But no, that was like nice.
I mean, it was relaxing, because one of the things I started to do, because my back was sore from drawing all day, I started to like do some movements, just yoga movements, basically, like stretching my back out to try and stop it being
I noticed this, and I was like, this is why I called you a participator at the end. I was like, Rebecca, you're doing all the things. Like, you're doing the things that you're meant to be doing. And
I was just saying, well, I may as well use this time for something. Because as nice as his singing was, I was getting a bit bored and my back hurt. And I was like, well, I know how I can fix my back. And this is one of the weird situations in which doing a couple of yoga poses isn't going to raise anyone's eyebrows. Yeah. So I may as well just go through my physio routine.
I look over and I'm like, what is that strange lump that's become Rebecca? Oh, right. She's in child's pose with a blanket draped over her. Just rocking it.
Got my phone
that's
out
exactly what you're meant to be doing. yeah. Sorry, on Facebook. No, it was funny and a good idea, really.
And then the other people, that's the funny thing, especially right at the beginning when he started singing and then other people joined in.
Yes. So I guess people know what to expect with these things. You can't imagine that happening. I was thinking about this. In an ayahuasca ceremony, I can't imagine anyone joining in with the icaros. But no one tells you exclusively not to.
Yeah.
But there's something about the associations that experienced people have with cacao are apparently things like singing, dancing, maybe hugging. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, but then he did say you're not meant to impose on anyone else's
that
space.
Was weird.
No, it's not. That's also
no,
part
I know,
of
but the way he said it at the end was, I mean, everything was a bit weird because it was all like, this should have been up top. You know, there should have been at the beginning.
Sure.
Here's what to expect. Here's what not to do. Here's what's okay to do.
Stuff. Yeah.
But he didn't do any of that.
No.
Which is fine because you do get a sense of what is appropriate in the room.
Yeah, but then, you know, like there was that girl who shared at the end, just to kind of skip ahead a little bit. She wanted to get up and dance, but felt a bit like self-conscious. And I think a lot of people had that experience of like, yeah, I just wanted to I was getting more into it, but then I was blocked. It's almost like, oh, I remembered that I was English and I stopped. But towards
maybe
the
if
end,
he'd said at the beginning, by the way, if you guys want to dance,
yeah,
then they wouldn't have felt
completely
blocked.
All of those things, like, hey, you might feel like this. This is what I mean. Setting expectations is a big thing that he is great. I truly, really like this man. He missed that expectation stuff out. So the singing got more group oriented just after, I'd say, our second cup, maybe around our third. And I didn't have a third cup, by the way. And you didn't drink yours.
No,
she did pour
I
it,
was
though.
under my blanket.
She poured it.
Oh, did she?
She's so sweet.
Katinka was pouring the drink.
So I remember some of the songs. So one went like this. Ring, a ring, a ring, ring. And it was just like, it's just a bad song. I don't know what it means. It was like a telephone. And the worst thing was, because Ricardo's singing was still lovely, even though he was singing ring, a ring, ring. Somebody else was joining in and doing it out of time.
Oh, no, yeah.
So whereas I think cacao ceremonies are meant to be these really heart-opening, loving experiences, I spent most of my time, if you can't tell already, in severe judgment of everyone around me, including myself. But yeah, I wasn't having that experience. I was kind of just like in full-on judge the hippie mode.
Yeah, at the beginning, he actually did say something useful at the beginning, which was you should focus on things you're grateful for.
I did that too, and that was good.
I completely forgot to do that.
Yeah, that was nice.
I really wish I'd remembered because then I wouldn't have been bored. I would have had like a mental exercise to do.
It definitely culled the hatred that was welling up in my heart at that point. Yeah.
What are you judging people for?
Just being kind of annoying. Like the heavy sighs.
Yeah.
I hate it. It's so unnecessary. Yeah, listeners, I'm sorry. Like, I sound like a real bitch and I'm fully aware, but like, that's just my experience.
Hey, that's your experience.
It's my experience, man.
You've got to be with it.
But,
yeah, the song that I remember was like, where is my Mentos? Where is my Mentos?
And there was also a Gestapo song. Just so many weird words that you start picking out in these songs.
That's the funny thing about listening to music in a foreign language. Your brain can't help but try and interpret it with English words, and then you get the weirdest things popping up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think that's at the point where I excuse myself to go and read every single poster in the toilet in the loo, because I was genuinely bored, and I think it's partly because it was late and I was tired and
it's
a little
long
bit
meditation.
grumpy.
It's like
we were there for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and you can't just go into meditation mode because there's something always happening, and you particularly had a fucking drum in your face.
Yeah,
like I can't imagine. Your distance would have been way more disturbing for me because even being where I was, I found it like, oh, it's just a bit too loud.
Yeah. I mean, it was a community centre, so there were quite a lot of posters up in the toilets. For example, I learned that if you have eggs and you want to know if they're good or bad, you put them in water, and if they float, it means they're bad and you should throw them away.
That's an old wives' tale.
It's not useful for me either because I don't eat eggs.
Right.
But, I mean, public service announcement. That's something I learned. I also learned that they were doing some kind of workshop on how to deal with single-use plastics, which sounded quite interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, all sorts of things going on at the Phoenix Arts and Community Centre in Brighton that I had no idea.
This episode was sponsored by.
And then I came back and it was more or less wrapping up, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I was a bit worried because I was bored too, and I was like, I can get through a 2-hour meditation. Like, I'm being ridiculous. So then we had to go back to the bloody share to the person to the right or to the left of you. My little woman completely ignored me until somebody came over to her. You were on my other side and you'd started talking to Kiki. So I was like there on my own until Poncho Man came up to me.
And saved you.
He was actually quite lovely. He was one of those people who just talks at you, but he was interesting. So that was fine. And we talked a bit about astrology and it was great.
Yeah, I was talking to Katinka and I overheard you talking and I was like, oh, is this a potential, love interest to Kat? Because you guys seemed very engaged. And I looked over and this guy, I mean, I'm sure he was lovely, but he was like in his late 60s and wearing a poncho. And I was like, maybe
Don't be
maybe
so
not Kat's
ageist.
type.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is.
He was gay though, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
so I had a nice chat with Katinka. She was really interested in my experience, which was lovely. And we actually talked about how difficult it is to put these sort of experiences into words.
Yes, we had a similar experience. It's true. Like when we tried to do this sharing thing, so this is what, didn't Katinka say something like, as soon as you share, you change it?
Yeah, exactly.
And my thing was like, me just saying words like, oh, I felt gratitude. It's like, no, the feeling was bigger than gratitude. It was a bunch of things mixed into one. And to try to box it into a word is crap. And my Poncho Man said something like, the word that kind of kept coming up for him is the word is. And I really like this idea of isness. I think what he was trying to say was, when you're in meditation and your thoughts are going all over the place and you think, now, come back to the now.
Yeah.
The problem with the word now, and he didn't really express this very well, but like, I think what he was saying was, now limits you just to a slice of time, whereas isness, or like just is, seems to like encapsulate what something was and something will be and what something is right now. Maybe not. I don't know.
It's like,
I really like this
maybe
idea.
like being.
Yeah, being.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's nice. It's interesting when I've definitely had meditation experiences where a sudden, like a word
just
pops into my head
really...
and it seems really salient.
Yes.
And like, I
enjoyed that. So I did really like that sharing at the end thing to one person. Sharing to the group is always a bit long because some people will always be like, did you remember?
It's my time to shine.
No, but do you remember the guy? So he was saying something like, he was a very like sweet seeming man. And he said something like, it felt like my arms had like rocks in them. And then he did this really long pause. And like everyone there is like smiling and nodding at him. And honestly, the pause was like 5 seconds. And he was like,
really long.
oh, I had deja vu. I was like, oh my God, he's just tripped out. He's having like a psychic break.
It was so
terrible.
sweet. And so he was talking about this experience of feeling like he had rods in his arms and they were like his bones.
Oh, I thought he said rocks.
No,
okay, rods.
Yeah. And like he could really strongly feel and visualize his bones. And then he was like staring at his arms for like 5 seconds in silence. And we were like, yeah.
But I love how everyone else was just like with him.
Yeah.
Like, yep, we get it.
And then afterwards he
nice.
was like, it's really nice. It's just really nice to be in a non-judgmental space where I can share this stuff. And then obviously I feel bad about being judgmental. But yeah.
I mean, honestly, so the thing that I said, my takeaway was something like, oh, I need to express the gratitude for the people in my life more. Okay, I do believe that. That's not really what I worked out in the ceremony though. What I worked out was I need to stop being so fucking judgmental.
Yeah.
Which like was a great realization. I also could not say that out loud because they'd have realized that I was judging them.
Yeah.
But Rebecca, call me up on that when I'm being a bitch.
I don't know. Like it's my favorite part of you. So.
Okay, I'll try. Maybe don't remove it.
No. My takeaway was something like I need to check in with my body more often because I had been, like I said, I spent all day in this terrible posture, and it wasn't until I sat down and tried to meditate and sit up straight that I realized how fucked my back was. And if I had just been on the regular, like checking in with my body, I wouldn't have had that experience. So that's a very practical thing, but I didn't feel moved spiritually.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you didn't feel. I thought it was weird that you didn't feel, but I assumed you'd felt the tingling sensations.
No, that's weird because I tingle at the drop of a hat, as you know. Like I see a tree that's beautiful and I'm like tingling.
All the tingles.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you just needed, but maybe it's something to do with you not getting that feeling from caffeine as well. Maybe you are like that's a chemical thing, right?
Yeah, they do that in those 23andMe tests, don't they? They
Yes.
tell you if you're sensitive. Did you have that when you did
I
yours?
did. I'm actually not overly sensitive to caffeine, which is great news. But I am, like, my experience of caffeine is that, it's pretty powerful. It's a drug.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it definitely affects people differently. So maybe I just wasn't getting the...
Yeah.
And then, so in that case, if I'm not getting that physiological effect, all
It's
I'm
hard
having
to
is
have-
sitting and meditating for 2.5 hours with a guy singing, which is nice, but considering it's on a hard floor and I'm really tired, it's just not the most
Not ideal.
environment.
I agree. It just brings up that whole thing of what I feel in all of these group situations is we're all so different, and it's really hard, and this is actually a cliche as well, but to not judge your experience to the other people around you. And maybe this is part of my judgment. It's like, I want to be so in it that I'm doing the heavy sigh.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's it.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Oh, there we go.
That
That's
makes sense.
Kat's
So
issue.
many things. Whenever you're being a judgmental bitch, I'm
It's
gonna remember that.
It's like, Kat, do you want to be them secretly? And I'll be
Secretly
like,
deep down.
yeah.
Do you want to wear the poncho?
Yes.
You want to wear the poncho?
I want to have the deja vu and trip everyone out for 5 seconds.
Oh, they
Anyway.
were. You might notice when we're recounting this experience that we're not talking about the moon.
Oh my
very
god, I
much.
just remembered. I'm sorry, listeners. You just had to sit through some random cacao stuff. You signed up for the moon, and we've given you cacao. So he did mention that it was a Gemini full moon, and I actually wanted to do this. I wanted to go off on a little diatribe. When is that the right word?
Yeah,
Okay.
diatribe.
Brilliant. Wicked.
Is tripe?
Diatribe.
Or
Maybe
is
it is tripe.
I'm thinking it's tripe because it's always tripe that they're saying.
Anyway, I'm going to go off on a little thing about what the Gemini full moon means to me. I'm really glad I didn't.
You could have done that in the sharing
But
circle.
I could have potentially done that and maybe picked up some clients, which would have been interesting.
Well, you almost had Poncho Man as your
I-
client.
I-
When I was
close.
overhearing your conversation, you were telling him that something bad was coming on a particular date and he should watch out for Saturn. And I was like,
was
Kat,
not
stop
doing
talking
that.
for business.
I told him that it was really great for creativity.
She's a good businesswoman.
Anyway, it was a bit of a letdown for me to not have a bit more chat about the full moon. I think some people were obviously acknowledging it, but a lot of them were talking about, I'm kind of like, so, and this is why we have to mention when this was recorded, because it was a lot to do with completion, and obviously the full moon, obviously listeners, is a lot to do with kind of completion or culmination of something, and a lot of people were clued up on that. And it was at the end of the year, so a lot of people were like reflecting on the year that had just been. So in that sense, that was kind of timely, but really Ricardo was just in cacao mode.
Yeah. But don't worry, if you're looking forward to Moon Chat, we're going to get into that.
Can we get into it now?
Yeah, right after this.
This show has already taken us to some strange places, literally and metaphysically, and we love making it for you.
If you enjoy listening and have $1 a month to spare, we'd appreciate your support on Patreon.
Patreon is a platform for supporting content creators like us.
If you pledge $1 a month, we'll spend it on boring things like hosting fees and audio equipment.
And fun things like psychic readings, crystal healing, ayahuasca retreats.
Yeah, we'll spend it on drugs.
There are lots of adventures we'd like to go on, so if you want us to go hunting for the Loch Ness Monster, visit a haunted castle or Area 51, you're going to have to chip in.
We think having conversations about this stuff, paranormal, spiritual, weird stuff, is really important, especially between people who don't agree. Having these experiences is fun, doing the research is interesting, but the most important thing is the conversations.
We hope listening to our podcast will inspire you to start talking to people you would normally dismiss as grumpy old skeptics.
Or flaky woo-woo seekers.
If you think these sorts of conversations are important too, you can support us on Patreon. And as a supporter, for as little as $1, you'll be able to vote on upcoming show ideas.
And if there's something you're desperate for us to look into, whether it's acupuncture or vampires, Patreon supporters' requests will always go to the top of our consideration list.
Find out more at patreon.com/Seeker Skeptic. And that's Patreon spelt Patreon. So we're going to kick off our research today with a little bit of conspiracy theory or science theory, which is what I like to call a conspiracy theory.
Oh, no.
So we're going to talk about whether or not the moon is real. I know you've been wondering it. So when I was Googling this, as you do, how you start off any good research is you Google it. And you find out that it's very hard to write to ask the right question that doesn't just bring up stuff about the moon landing.
Yeah, I know. It's so hard
annoying
to find out anything about the moon without all the stuff.
The thing is, I know that I've seen some really interesting and compelling arguments for the moon not being real before. I just couldn't find it because of the moon landing stuff. So that's my excuse.
Well, that's part of the
Google.
reason why we decided to do the moon landing in a separate episode, because there's just so much to say about that we wouldn't want to, cloud our...
Exactly. But maybe it's a conspiracy theory that Google is trying to hide all this stuff about the moon not being real.
Oh my God. So, like, the moon landing conspiracy is a distraction invented by whoever built the moon to distract us from the fact that the moon isn't actually real.
That's really good. We
Keep
should tell
pulling the thread.
We should tell David Icke. So David Icke was the key. And listeners, if you have heard our episode on David Icke, you know our opinions on him. Wonderful man. If you type in "is the moon real" plus David Icke in quotes, you will get some more interesting results. One of them being the hollow moon theory. So you've heard of the hollow Earth theory, perhaps?
That's that the Earth is hollow?
Indeed. And I'm not going to go into that again. That's probably another episode. But the hollow moon hypothesis is a little bit lesser known. And it's the idea that, shocker, the moon is hollow and probably the product of an alien civilization. So this idea first appeared in none other than the H.G. Wells book in 1901, The First Men in the Moon, right? And it relies on a few little odd factoids about the moon that just don't seem to add up. Number one, the large lunar craters, which we think, scientists tell us that they're formed by meteor impacts hitting the moon. The problem is they're generally too shallow or even have a flat or convex bottom, which it shouldn't have. It's almost like they're hitting a shell underneath the mantle, like the top bit.
Oh, I see. So the theory is like the outer bit is soft, but then there's an inner hard bit.
Yeah. And that would be like protecting something or nothing. When the Apollo 12 crashed down onto the moon's surface, it was claimed that the moon rang like a bell for an hour. You know what bells are?
Hollow.
Fucking hollow.
Oh my God, it's not making sense.
And it's too light. So the moon's density is 3.3 grams per centimeter cubed. So, anyway, the Earth's one is 5.5. So it doesn't make sense if the theory that the moon was formed from a giant impact, which ejected some of the early Earth's upper crust into the orbit. So people say that if it was made from the same stuff as the Earth, why is it so light?
Oh, I might have an explanation for that.
I actually already know.
Oh, go on then.
Well, yeah, it's because the Earth's crust is less dense than the core. So, and I will quote Mr. David Icke. There is one heck of a story to be told about what is happening on and especially inside the moon. I have been connecting the dots with regard to the moon for the best part of, get this, 2 years.
Whoa.
And it is clear to me that it is not a natural body, but a control system that is manipulating our sense of reality to make us the slave race of those who are doing it. I mean, I don't know what more convincing you need. Drop the mic. My favourite weirdness about the moon is that it's too perfect. So the average distance from the Earth to the moon, and you might have heard this before, is 108 times the moon's diameter. And the same thing is true about the Earth's distance to the sun, but like kind of the other way around. So I think it's 108 times the sun's diameter. So that 108 number, which you come across in like prayer beads and stuff like that, has this really beautiful correlation to the relationship of the Earth between the moon and the sun. So it's like these perfect distances, basically.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a bit of when we were doing the numerology in the Crowley episode.
Yeah,
you know,
can
like
find some amazing.
Exactly. If you start looking at enough numbers, you find one that is the number you're looking for, or that is a number with significance.
Yeah, like the diameter it's kind of random.
Like, why the diameter?
Anyway, we'll go with it. The one that I really like, but you know why that's cool? Because of the size. So there's something else about the size of it as well. So it's really weird that the moon is perfectly the size of the sun when they line up. And that's why we get these perfect eclipses. That's crazy.
I mean, yeah, it's a
very big one. And the moon miraculously mimics the movements of the sun. When the sun rises in the south, the moon sets in the north. And when the sun sets in the north, the moon rises in the south. That shouldn't be. There's no rule of maths or physics to explain why that should happen.
What?
Yeah.
I don't believe you. I think there probably is a rule of maths or physics that explains the movement of the sun and moon.
Until you do it, until you explain it. No. No, that's just a coincidence.
No, yeah, sure. It's coincidence that it happens that way. But there is maths and physics that explain how planetary bodies move. That's literally the science of astronomy.
Well, Rebecca, I'm done with my explanation. I think I really won here, listeners. You decide. Rebecca, why is the moon here?
So, why is the moon here? Well, what did you think before you started doing this research? Why did you think the moon was here? Or there, I guess, up there in the sky.
So I found out a few weeks ago because I was watching this great thing. Listeners, if you haven't listened to it, I watched it. It's called One Strange Rock with my hero Will Smith. I found out that the moon may have been formed by that impact.
Yeah.
And it got kind of like broken off from the Earth.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that gave the Earth its tilt.
Yeah.
Which is what causes its seasons.
Yeah.
And by the way, in astrology, there is a lot to do with like the moon being this ever fluctuating thing, like our seasons, and being like related to that. And I just, sorry, my mind just like goes crazy.
I always thought that the moon was just a big bit of rock that got caught in our orbit.
Yeah.
That was my
so I
assumption.
thought that until I found this thing out.
Yeah, until I started researching this. And I texted like a handful of people, whoever was latest on my WhatsApp chat, I sent them a text saying, how do you think the moon happened?
Fair.
And almost everyone gave me the answer you just did. So everyone is more
They've
informed
really
about the moon
figured it
than
out.
me.
Well, no, that was pretty new to me, I must say.
But so I watched this amazing documentary voiced by Patrick Stewart.
Nice.
Which is where I'm going to be drawing most of my information from, and I'll put the notes
Because
in the show
hashtag
notes.
Star Trek.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, what Patrick Stewart taught me is that no other planet has a moon like ours. Jupiter has like 6 tiny rubbish moons, but they're much smaller than our moon. Mars has 2, but they're also rubbish. Venus and Mercury have no moons. Like our moon is unique in our solar system to have such a big orbiting body. It is. It's mysteriously big. Like, what the fuck's going on? This is one of the things that scientists wondered about the moon. It controls our tides, as everyone knows, but this was really hard for me to get my head around, like how exactly that worked. So basically, whichever side of the Earth is closest to the moon, the water is pulled up by the gravity of the moon towards it. So you get like a bulge, which is high tide. So obviously that water's being pulled from somewhere. So low tide happens on the 2 sides that are not facing the moon, or I guess the 4 sides if you think of...
You're doing well.
It's so difficult for me to think in 3-dimensional space, and you'll see lots of diagrams if you Google this, but still it's hard to think. And then so there are obviously, most places, there are 2 high tides a cycle. So there's a high tide on the side that's nearest the moon and a high tide on the side that's furthest from the moon. So I was like, but why is there a high tide on the side that's furthest from the moon? Because obviously that's not to do with gravity, and that really puzzled me. And I sort of think I understand it now. Basically, it's like, so the moon is still exerting gravitational pull on all of the water, but its pull is interrupted by the Earth because it's on the far side. So that side relaxes and bulges away from the moon because the gravitational pull is being blocked by the Earth. And then there's also something about centrifugal force and all sorts of other factors. But that's basically what it is. So, like you say, the moon controls the tides and it gives us our seasons.
Okay, so that's real.
Yeah. But that said, 1/3 of the tidal effect is caused by the sun.
How does it give it? Because my explanation as to why it gives us our seasons, I only just say that because it's the thing that tilted the Earth on its axis.
Yeah.
Is that all you're saying?
Kind of. And I'll get onto that in a minute. So, as I said up top, the moon affects us because of light, whether it gives us light in the evenings. And it also is the basis of a lot of, calendars. I mean, the reason we have a month that is roughly the same length as the moon. Yeah, exactly. And so that's not just for us, that's also for animal life. So there are birds that use the lunar cycles to time their migration. You'll be happy to hear that's something to do with birds. So if you're a bird and you live on the equator, and you need to know what time it is to migrate, you can't really use the changing seasons because you're equatorial and those seasons don't change that much.
Bird listeners, you understand?
Yeah, exactly. So what they do is they use the moon, and I don't know, like it's not like they have little moon charts. But there's
how do you know?
Barrow's petrel. Petrels. I don't know how to say that word actually. Petrel.
Patron?
I should ask another birder. They're basically like something between albatross and seagull.
Cool.
As seabirds. So they migrate. They're equatorial migrators. They arrive at their mating colonies at the full moon. So they're obviously doing something to time it, and they all need to get together, obviously, to mate at the same time, so it's really convenient. There's so many examples all across the animal kingdom, but there's coral that release spores, there's turtles that do egg, there's all sorts of stuff going on. So that's what the question is, something along the lines of, what has the moon ever done for us?
Yes.
It gives us our tides, it gives us our lights, and it gives us all a sense of time, including animals, not just people. The thing about how it got here is really interesting. And I can't believe I never even questioned this before, because I've always been into the moon, like I said, with the Wicker stuff. Before, I guess, what's it called? The giant impact hypothesis. Before that became the predominant theory.
And it is, right?
Yes, it is.
Because David Icke doesn't believe it.
No, there you go. That's how you know it's right. There's 3 theories. The co-accretion theory, which is basically the moon was created at the same time we were created, the same time the Earth was created. Sure. That doesn't hold up because it doesn't have a big iron core like you'd expect. Capture theory, which was what I thought until I started researching this, which is it's just a big bit of rock that's been captured by our gravity. That can't be true because it's too big. Our gravity isn't strong enough to capture something that big. The other option was the fission scenario, which was actually advanced by George Darwin, son of Charles. Lesser
known.
Yeah. The reason he's lesser known is because he was wrong, I guess. But he had a good go. So he reckoned that there was when the Earth was all molten, it was spinning around so fast that like a glob came off and floated into space and became the moon.
Okay, that's a pretty good one, given that they're made out of similar stuff.
Exactly. It's not that far from the truth, but when they started modelling it in computer models, it just could never span that far. So we have no evidence that the Earth's ever spanned far enough to spit off a glob.
Okay.
So it was actually until really recently people were debating about these 3 theories and finding problems with all of them and thinking, well, what this guy Harold Urey, he's a geochemist and he's just obsessed with the moon, or at least this is what it said in the documentary with Patrick Stewart. It said none of these theories work, so the moon must not be there at all. He's clearly just making a joke. Okay, but I wonder whether that's the start of some conspiracy theories.
Definitely.
You know how people often pick up on
inconsistencies, uncertainties in science. It's like, well, if they don't know, it must be aliens.
It reminded me of the bee thing. Did you ever hear that? People say, oh, it's physically impossible for bees to fly, so it must be magic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, and it was really funny because they are just imagining the bee's wings going up and down, not taking into account the vibrate. But if you don't take into account the vibration, it is impossible for a bee to fly like a bird just flapping its wings. Yeah. And it's just such a great example of human arrogance. It's like, I can't explain it, it must be magic. It's not just that I haven't figured it out yet.
Or, hang on, you can flip that on its head and say, science can't explain it, so it can't be real. Because at one point, maybe astrology... Anyway, I'm just saying. Hashtag just saying.
So apparently this guy, Harold Urey, he was really, really into the moon. I started going to look him up. He volunteered for a mission to the moon. He said, this was before anyone had been, he said to the lunar astronaut Harrison Smith, he just came forward. He wasn't the astronaut or anything. He was like, I will go and I don't care if I don't come back. That's how devoted I am as going to the moon. Because I guess he wanted to see that it was real. So the documentary I watched, which is called If We Had No Moon, immediately as soon as you hear Patrick Stewart's voice, you just start believing everything he says.
And you melt. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. But there were, there are a couple of problems with it, which we'll get into in a minute. But he basically explained to me the giant impact hypothesis, which is there's this Mars-sized body that hit the Earth. They call it Thea, which is cool because
like
Thea,
goddess.
Yeah, exactly. Mother of Selene,
yeah, nice.
Which is perfect. So it hit just right. And they showed this in the documentary. It was really cool. Like it would, if it had hit ever so slightly either one way or the other, it wouldn't have happened. But it hit just right. That and like Earth was terrible. It was a really nasty place back then. It was all like lava and just not habitable at all. But this thing hits just right, and it throws off a bunch of debris, and it also smashes up itself. And then that would have formed like a ring around the Earth for a little while. Wow. And then it coalesced. So what the moon is, it's not just our crust, but it's also little bits of Thea. And that was 4.51 billion years ago. And they reckon that there's still some questions about it, though, because they think that the rock samples show that the moon is almost identical to Earth, when they've modeled it, they would expect it to be 60% Theia. So they're not sure what's going on, but it's a real problem because we only have a very limited sample of moon rock, obviously. So who knows? But yeah, so kind of like you were saying before, like it's the perfect distance. Everything's perfect. That's so weird, which is exactly what the conspiracy theories people lock onto. I think it's really funny because it's like, it's kind of like, actually, it's like the fine-tuning argument for God. People are like, oh, everything's so perfect, God must have made it this way. It's a similar sort of argument.
But this is the thing. I think what it all comes down to is we're all talking about the same thing. Yes, it's perfect and a miracle. And isn't that what we're talking about when we're talking about God? It just means that my only difference in my story is that, maybe it's the thing that made the moon isn't some like old man sitting on a cloud in the sky. It's nature itself, and it's the same thing. It's still God.
Well, I don't know if I'd want to use the word God there, but you're right, it is amazing.
Science or whatever,
and wonderful.
But either way, let's everyone admit that it's a miracle, and let's marvel in that.
I mean, but you've just redefined the word miracle. So now the word miracle means something wonderful that we appreciate.
Well, yeah. One thing I will say, my friend pointed this out the other day. There's a quote that's probably misattributed to Einstein, which is like, either everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. Which is like, try telling that to a mother with a kid with cancer.
Yeah.
Like, don't say everything's a miracle, because it's not. But the moon is a miracle.
I mean, yeah, if you by your definition of the word miracle, I agree with you. But I don't think that's the common definition of the word miracle. I think most people think it has something to do with God. But anyway, just the idea that this is a really happy coincidence is true. But if you start thinking of things in a bigger scale, like a galaxy, universe scale, I mean, there are lots of people who say that our universe is infinite, or at least really, really fucking big. Also the idea of like multiple dimensions. In a space that big, crazy things are going to happen. Yeah. So it suddenly seems like a little bit less amazing when you put it on the scale. It's kind of like when you have enough data, like everything will happen. Strange things happen. Things that seem very unlikely will happen because in a big enough data set, unlikely things are going to happen.
And this is how science sucks the magic out of life. Stop it.
The biggest thing that really freaked me out about this documentary, the Patrick Stewart one, and I was a little bit stoned when I was watching it. Perfect. Because that's how I do all my research for this podcast, as you know. Well, as listeners don't know, but Kat is very well aware.
I think they've worked it out.
Is that the moon is leaving us.
Get out.
I know. That's exactly what it's doing. It's getting out. So when you said it's perfect to cover up to make an eclipse, now, when it first span off, when Theia hit and it first exploded off, it would have been 15 times bigger in the sky.
Oh, wow.
And the Earth was just a shit show. Yeah. Like, it was like the weather was crazy, tsunamis, lava, just nightmare, because the gravitational pull from the moon was huge. And then it's slowly been receding ever since. And it's still going. It's just in
human time that we see it as perfect.
Yeah.
And it won't always be like that.
It's getting 4 centimeters away every year.
Wow.
Yeah. And this, as the moon gets further and further away, the Earth rotates slower and our days get longer.
Wow. So, but when it will be relative, like we won't notice time slowing down, or will we?
No, we will, because our length of days.
Oh, right. Like
daylight.
Clocks will still work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a geoscientist called Stephen Mayer. He explained that it's like when an ice skater slows their spin by putting out their arms, which I think is quite a good way to visualize it. So 1.4 billion years ago, the moon was closer. Days only lasted 18 hours.
What?
And yeah.
Holy shit. Well, okay, guys, I mean, we're not going to be alive for this, but like, isn't that weird? I mean, I just think metaphorically, and especially if you're learning about astrology, you don't take that into account. You're not thinking that that's going to change.
It's really weird, isn't it? So as you said, the moon. So what happened when Theia hit? I mean, back in the day, whatever I said, 5 billion years ago, the universe was like an insanely chaotic place. Stuff was flying around all over the place, and we, like, if you look at other planets, our solar system, a lot of them are wonky, or But anyway, we were doing fine until this Theia came along and knocked us off our axis, and now our axis is at 23.5 degrees,
something like that.
Yeah, which gives us our seasons, and then the moon stabilizes that, so we stay. And there are other planets, so Mars, for example, it's also off its axis, but because it has no moon, it just wobbles.
Oh,
Which is like means it
unstable,
basically
that makes sense.
exactly. So it doesn't
Erratic.
have seasons. It's
Yeah.
much. It's not as like the possibility of life on Mars
Yeah.
is very slim because it doesn't have that nice
You don't get a chance to get like that breather.
exactly to get going. Yeah. The other interesting
Wow.
thing, and I don't know if this is true, but this is a theory that's been kicked around by scientists, is it's kind of weird that we have water on our Earth because we're in the inner solar system and it's really dry here generally, like most of the planets are dry. So there's been a lot of talk about where did we get our water from? Where does Earth's water from? And one of the theories is because Theia came from the outer solar system that it actually brought us our water.
Cute.
Yeah, so maybe we have, Theia and the moon to thank for the fact that we even have water, which is obviously the way we can only have carbon-based life is because of water.
It's so nice. All of the things that we associate, which I'll talk about in a little bit, with the moon, it's like it literally brings us. Like it's even science says it's associated with water in the seasons. It's like, really nice.
So this documentary is going on about how like the moon's leaving us, and I'm getting quite distressed because I'm stoned, and it was basically saying like it was showing pictures of Giza, the pyramids in the snow, and saying, could this be the future?
So
and then it was showing pictures of like all cities all flooded and like, oh, it's going to be terrible. And there's magma and ice. It's going to be like...
So we need to like wrestle with the moon. We need to like get a lasso. And
it's interesting you should say that because they had people on this documentary proposing similar things. So
come on, Elon.
Yeah, exactly. So the moon affects the tides, but also the tidal effect works on the moon too. So the gravitational pull of the Earth is exerted on the moon too. And there's this guy on the documentary. In fact, I can't remember what his name was, but he was cited. I wish I could find this in my notes, but I can't see it now. It's irrelevant because it's probably not going to happen. And if it does happen, it'll be like way far in the future. But his idea was if we dam up the oceans, we can stop the moon from leaving, or at least slow it.
That's
moving.
the most fucked up thing I've ever heard.
I know.
It's so male. I'm sorry, but that is like, we need to
control her.
It's
Bring
like,
her
have you
back
ever-
to us.
This is maybe like crude and not even relevant, but it makes me think of a Joe Rogan joke where he's talking about tampons and like how it's such a male thing. Like a woman just wants like a liner. Just I'm just gonna like just clean it up. I'm just gonna put a liner in my pants. And the male's like, let's just dam it up. Let's just stick like a phallic shape, like a long pointy object up to there and stop it. That's the equivalent of this. It's really fucked up.
I'll have to give that some thought.
Anyway, you have to see the joke.
I am rather fond of tampons, so they are convenient. I wouldn't be without them. Anyway, but then can you also say the moon cup is equally as... Because that's the same thing.
Even the shape of it is like, it's more of a feminine shape. It's more of a receptive shape. It's a fucking cup. That's a moon lunar thing. That's way more in the right line. And it's deliberately flexible. Sorry, listeners, maybe we have an episode all about...
different menstrual products.
Reel it back in.
So that's one theory that I did a bit of, because this is an old documentary, so I did a bit of research to see if this guy, I couldn't even figure out who exactly he was on the documentary. That's why it's not in my notes. I remember now. I couldn't figure out who was proposing this idea of damming up the oceans. So I Googled around and I couldn't find out who he was or whether he'd ever, tried doing it. But I did find a New York Times article from, I don't know how long ago, like 10 years ago, talking about how the dams that we've already created with the oceans have very minutely affected the moon. So it's not an absolutely bonkers idea. The other theory, which the documentary credited to Alexander Abian, was stealing one of Jupiter's moons.
This is crazy.
Yeah. Just pop that in there so we have two moons. It can like balance it out.
Oh my God. Jupiter would not be happy with that. Can you imagine? Gaia?
He reckoned that this would somehow stabilize it if we got the right moon and brought it across. But the weird thing was when I started getting really skeptical of this documentary. I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to fact check literally everything from this documentary now, because I look up Alexander Abian. He's got a Wikipedia page, and what it says on his Wikipedia page, there's no mention of stealing Jupiter's moon, but what there is, that he had a plan apparently to blow up the moon. Because Wikipedia tells me that he thought the moon was the cause of all like climate disaster.
Okay, so he just doesn't know what to think.
He's quoted as saying, if you make a deep hole by deep drilling and then you put their atomic explosive and you detonate it by remote control, from the Earth.
I think he's got
Problem solved.
he's got mummy issues.
It's so
Let's
weird.
all
So I don't
accept
know whether
this.
the documentary was just wrong about
Right.
bringing Jupiter's moon or what. Anyway, this guy had mad ideas about the moon. Anyway, so I'm watching this documentary and I'm like, oh shit, the moon's leaving us. Climate catastrophe. I mean, like, I'm worried enough about the climate. Now this is
Sure.
an extra thing to be worried about. And it didn't. And it wasn't until the next morning when I started to sit down and actually fact check some of it that, don't worry, the moon is not going away forever. It's going, in 50 billion years, it's going to reach its maximum orbit and then it will just stick there. It's not going to leave us entirely. It's not just drifting off into
I
space.
see.
It's only going to, and it will, at that point, our days on Earth will be 47 days long.
Wow.
So it will have a massive effect.
And eclipses will look totally different, right?
Yeah,
it will be like
there
a
basically
little,
won't be eclipses.
but
You won't even notice it. It'll just be a tiny little.
of course, and the sun will just blow it up. Okay, that's interesting.
And then, this didn't really make me worry less, but in 5 billion years, the sun's going to die anyway. So by this time, in 50 billion years, there's not going to be anyone on Earth lamenting
really
the lack
care
of the
so much
moon.
about this.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I hope that allays your fears.
So we've done all of the science stuff. I thought we would.
Phew,
Start-
thank God that's over.
I thought we'd start talking about celebrations.
Yay.
Yay! So, when I was in Thailand, so this was 2019, I became quite aware of the kind of popularity of moon celebrations, and this was particularly something that's also called a Mid-Autumn Festival, and it's common in various Asian countries. And it's not like every full moon. This is specifically around autumn time.
Is that because that moon rises earlier or is bigger or something?
I thought there were various reasons depending on the culture.
Because that's what we call a hunter's moon here.
Hunter's moon, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason is because it comes up earlier
Interesting.
in autumn. There's a particular full moon that comes up a little bit earlier just because
Right.
of the way things work out, which means you could stay out late to do
Yeah.
more hunting gathering type stuff.
Okay, that makes a lot of
I
sense.
think.
And I'm sure you could pull that into these associations as well. But I also wonder if just also timing feels about right, like to do with any kind of harvest stuff. I feel like having a festival there. I think just a lot of things have kind of coincided. But anyway, what it's come down to is usually the 15th day of the 8th month of the lunar calendar with the full moon. So it's going to be on different days, but it's usually around mid-September to early October in the Gregorian calendar, which is what we use, by the way.
That's what I use.
I don't. I use the Ethiopian calendar. Okay, so
That's what those stone tablets are about.
So this happens, like I said, in many countries in the East, and they all pretty much have their own stories and mythologies around it. It symbolizes a lot of different things, mostly around family and children, which, again, with astrology, that's kind of like a good association with the moon as well. But also there's just like general moon worship. So, for example, there's this deity called Chang'e. I think maybe that's how you say it, but she's known as the moon goddess of immortality.
Oh.
So her story, got some stories for you. So after the hero Hui, Houyi, tell me how to say that, please, listeners. He shot down 9 of the 10 suns because if you didn't know, there used to be 10 suns in the sky. So, and he was pronounced king by the people. Yeah, well done.
Because it was too hot.
Of course. I mean, China in the summer, I assume, is, some of it anyway. It's a big country. So the problem was that he became a conceited and tyrannical king.
As they do.
And in order for him to kind of like just keep living, this is like a very like, I guess, a solar ambition. It's just like to keep going, no death.
You keep saying this is really interesting. Can we like bookmark that to come back to
Solar.
the solar
Of the
ambitions and the
sun.
lunar?
Yeah, it's just like
okay.
And so he asked for a life-giving elixir. But his wife, Chang'e, stole it because she was like, no one wants this dick to be ruling forever. I'm going to steal your elixir. And she stole it on the 15th of August, which I don't know how that became the 15th of September, but whatever. It was significant. So she took the potion. He got angry and shot at her and missed. And then she managed to flee to the moon and became the spirit of the moon. Hui died because he was overcome with a great anger. And after that, people sacrificed to Chang'e on this 15th of August to commemorate her action. So they're, celebrating a thieving wife, basically.
I've never heard of someone getting so angry that they died before. Like, I've heard people getting so sad they died.
Yeah. It's a really weird idea, isn't it?
I'm so angry. Oh.
Yeah. Here's my favourite one, and you mentioned this earlier with the mention of rabbits. So the Cambodian celebrations involve various offerings that are popular with rabbits. I remember reading that for the first time, and I was like, they eat rabbits? And no, it's like they eat food that rabbits like.
Oh, like carrots.
Carrots, various fruits, a traditional dish called uk and bok, which is basically rice that's fried in the husk, pounded to remove the husk, and mixed with banana and coconut. So listeners, if you want to kind of try a version of this, just get some rice, mash in some banana and mash in some coconut. I watched a 10-minute YouTube video of somebody just doing this.
Do you fry it then afterwards? Make little like...
You could, but people just eat it like kind of gross
it's
porridge.
just like a... Oh.
Yeah. You could.
I could see it in like little pancakes.
Oh my God.
That would be really nice.
I'm not coming around for your version of ambok.
You use plantain instead of banana, so it's sort of savoury.
Oh yeah.
I reckon that could work.
Listeners, we'll let you know how it goes. And they eat that in front of their homes around midnight to make wishes to the moon.
Oh, I love this idea.
So yeah, they have this legend where Chedok, sorry, these words are all very hard for me, where a rabbit lives in the moon and watches over the Cambodian people. How nice, like a rabbit. I think that's a good one to tell little kids.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's nothing weird about that.
That's a good lie to tell little children.
And my other favorite one is from Vietnam, and this describes the legend of Khoi, whose wife accidentally urinated on a sacred banyan tree, and the tree began to float towards the moon, and Khoi, trying to pull the tree back down to earth, floated up to the moon with it, leaving him there stranded, I guess, with the banyan tree. So every year during the Mid-Autumn Festival, children light lanterns and do a kind of procession to show Khoi the way back to Earth.
Aww.
So yeah, silly wife. What happened to her?
Well, you have to urinate somewhere. You
don't do it on a banyan tree. So purposes of these festivals are varied. We've got matchmaking or finding love. It's just been associated with marriages. Girls would pray to Changi to help fulfill their romantic wishes. I kind of couldn't find out why. I could understand why it was associated with fertility.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese, for example, believed that the sun and the moon are a couple and the stars are their children. Beautiful. And when the moon is pregnant, it becomes round, and that's the full moon.
Ah.
And after it has the baby, it becomes a crescent. That's after having the baby. The baby. And these beliefs made it popular among women to worship and give offerings to the moon on this evening. And finally, my favorite bit, and this is what I experienced in Thailand, was the moon cakes. Have you seen these?
No,
they're beautiful.
I haven't.
There's a picture of one in my Instagram feed. It's basically a little pie, but it's kind of like the texture of a pork pie, and maybe only a fraction of listeners will know what a pork pie, like a British pork pie, is.
I don't know what one tastes like.
Of course
it's
you
just
don't.
you on your own.
Bloody vegans. I'm sure they make vegan pork pies. I'm going to buy you one. And it's like, but filled with a mince pie filling. So it's like fruit and nuts. I bought one and it wasn't even that sweet. It just had that kind of nice pastry.
I just assumed that any kind of moon-based delicacy would be white.
This was like toasted looking, it's like pastry.
But like all the like mince pie filling is like dark brown.
Yeah, so you could have different fillings, but beans are a common filling in a lot of Asian foods, like aduki beans. Really good. I love bean fillings, just in case you wanted to know. And there's like this tradition of like making these moon cakes during the Mid-Autumn Festival. And the big thing is like you slice it up. So that everyone in the house has one. But I kind of just bought one for myself and thinking, it's quite a small pie. It's like the size of, a pork pie. You eat that to yourself. It was like the densest thing I ever had. I think it took me like 3 days to eat it. It was just very strange. That's all I've got on the amazing moon festivals.
So I also looked into a bit about the gods and goddesses of the moon. And I say gods and goddesses because Wikipedia has a list of lunar deities. And we've been talking... we've been referring to the moon as female, and that's been our sort of assumption going into this research. It's certainly my assumption. But on this list of lunar deities, I broke it down. 39 female, 35 male.
Get the out. What?
Yeah. So the moon is not worldwide characterized always as female. In fact, it's more or less even. There were a couple of moon deities that I couldn't clearly gender, like they were animals or they were sometimes male, sometimes female, so I just cut those out.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's pretty close, 39-35. I noticed in Europe it's heavily weighted towards female, which is why we probably think of the moon as female. In Asia it's weighted towards male. Wow. Everywhere else it's more or less 50-50. Yeah, I mean, that's a very unscientific analysis of the data. And the Encyclopedia Britannica says that hunter-gatherers usually see the moon as male and like kind of aggressive, like mean, basically. Agricultural people generally see the moon as female and benevolent.
Wow.
They didn't, I mean, there was no explanation for this. That's just what the Encyclopedia Britannica says. So I'm going to give you an example of a female moon deity, a male one, and something where, it's up for grabs. Yeah. So first, let's do female. Selene from Greek mythology, daughter of Thea, which I love. So the etymology of her name is uncertain, but if it's from the Greek origin, which is what people think, it's probably connected to the word silas, light. That makes sense. So basically, she's a personification of the moon. She's often drawn like riding a moon chariot, and that's how the moon moves around, because she's driving her chariots around. There's this beautiful depiction of her on the moon chariot, which is dated to about 5 BCE, so pretty damn old. There's an ancient Greek tragedian called, no idea how to pronounce this, Aeschylus, who calls her the Eye of the Night, which I think is beautiful. So her story, the main story that she's famous for, she got up to lots of hijinks like all the Greek goddesses and gods did, but the thing that she's famous for is falling in love with a mortal man called Endymion. Sometimes he's described as a shepherd, sometimes he's a prince, sometimes he's a king, but the point is he's a straight up hottie. He's absolutely gorgeous and he's parading around on Earth as these hot men will, and we're looking down from space thinking, ooh, I'd like to get a bit of that, but we're stuck up in space being the moon. So he was, unfortunately, like many of these attractive men, he was a bit vain. So he wished to stay young and beautiful forever, as you would. So he made like a deal with Zeus, or in some stories he was cursed by Zeus, but whatever. He's put into an eternal slumber where he will stay young and beautiful but asleep forever. And lots of the pictures have him lying there with like all his robes off, and then Selene's like coming down. So I'm going to give you a bit of a sense of this from Lucian. This is Dialogues of the Gods, obviously, 19, translated by Fowler. So this is a conversation between Aphrodite and Selene. Aphrodite says, sorry? Aphrodite.
I'm kidding. It's okay.
What is this I hear about you, Selene? When your car is over Carla, you stop it to gaze at Endymion sleeping hunter fashion in the open. Sometimes, they tell me, you actually get out and go down to him. And Selene replies, Aphrodite, ask that son of yours. He must be the answer for it all. Because, of course, Aphrodite's son is Eros, love. Aphrodite says, well now, what a naughty boy. But tell me, is Endymion handsome? There is always comfort in our humiliation. Selene replies, most handsome, I think, my dear. You should see him when he has spread out his cloak on the rock and he is asleep. His javelin's in his left hand, just slipping from his grasp. The right arm bent upwards, making a bright frame to his face, and he breathing softly in helpless slumber.
Tell me more about his javelin.
Then I come noiselessly down, treading on tiptoe not to wake and startle him. But there, you know all about it. Why tell you the rest? I am dying of love. That is all.
Can we do an episode where we just act out some of these
so
like
good.
old things?
Yeah, I should have sent you that dialogue so we could have done it as a dramatic reenactment. So this is basically the image that is always recreated of Selene looking down on him and longing for him whilst he's lying there.
Which is like the moonlight.
Yeah, exactly. It's just such a beautiful image. It often turns up on funerary urns because obviously he's asleep, which kind of translates to death. So the idea of still being in love with someone after they've died. Apparently it'd be something that would be commissioned by a wife whose husband had died, and she'd make this to show, that she still loved him even though they couldn't be together. Wow. It's really touching, especially now, although not true, I mean, for many reasons, but also not even metaphorically true, because the moon is leaving. She's not coming down to us. She's going. She'll
be fine. She just needs some distance.
So it's true. And then she'll settle down 50 billion years ago in the future. So another rabbit one, Tua Yi. He's from Chinese sort of folk religion. I don't know, Bon or whatever. So he's the rabbit god. And Wikipedia tells me that his cult started in only 1906 in Beijing. And then it sort of people weren't into it anymore. It disappeared. But it's recently been revived. In fact, autumn of 2011, there was a new shrine put up to him in Yutan Park, which is like a massive park in Beijing. It's like over 300 statues of him. He's super cute. And I say he, but sometimes he's represented as being female, and sometimes they say it's just because he's wearing female clothes. So it's kind of like, I mean, he's a rabbit, you know.
Rabbits are male, like dogs are male and cats are female.
Okay. So what's the female version of a rabbit?
They're all male.
Yeah, but if dogs are male and cats are female.
What is Goofy?
What's Goofy? He's a dog.
But Pluto's a dog.
I don't know. I'm not very familiar with the Disney universe.
Okay, let's get back
I know,
on
I was
track.
just saying. Anyway, yeah. This guy, Tuoye. So there was a terrible time of plague. All across China, awful, and people didn't know what to do, and as you can imagine, time of plague, bad. And the moon's looking down on this, and she's, or he's, or it's getting worried and wants to help. So they send down Tuoye to go and solve the problem, this rabbit. And he comes down and he's got the cure to the plague with him. It's sort of, he is it. He's like a magical rabbit that cures the plague. But no one will let him into their house because he's white, and white is the colour of death. And they're like, fuck off, you're not coming in. We've already got enough to deal with the plague. Wow. So he hops off to the local shrine and puts on the robes of a god.
Oh.
And then he comes back and everyone lets him in and he cures the plague, and now they worship him as the rabbit god.
I'm just imagining this little like rabbit head, like with the height of a human in this cave. Yeah. That's such a great image.
You've got to do a Google image search on him. It's TU'ERYE. That's his name.
I might have to commission a painting, and you know who I'm going to ask. I can't.
Oh yes, I do.
Yeah,
our favourite listener.
Yes.
So whenever you see a little statue of him, it's this little head, and then all his robes are like oversized because he's like wearing robes.
That's what I mean.
It's so cute. It's a really popular festival for kids, and they buy the little statues and everything. Yeah, brilliant. That's awesome. So that's our rabbit one, and then I'll leave this section with a male god, Ingaluk. He's from Inuit mythology. His whole deal is he has a sister, and he's one of those horrible, handsy guys like we were talking about earlier, and he's always like getting on with all the women and just generally causing trouble. But one evening he looks into the women's sleeping quarters and he looks at them all, eyeing them all up with his male gaze, and he sees his sister as the most attractive of all of them, and he thinks she's never going to go for it because I'm her brother,
right?
And she's all hung up, sort of prissy sister who's not going to go for it. So he comes up with a plan, which is to sneak in there at night and have sex with her while she doesn't know who he is.
Oh my god!
I know,
this is worse than Game of Thrones.
Yeah. So he comes and seduces her in the dark, and she's, for some reason in the story, she's fine with that. Like, no problem. But she does get curious about who it could possibly be.
It's like, you can rape me, but at least tell me who you are.
Yeah, come on, dude. So she comes up with a counter plan, and her plan is when he's raping her, when they're having sex, she'll get her hands covered in soot and touch his face, and then she'll be able to see who it was because he'll have soot all over his face.
This is why I keep soot by my bed, in case you wondered.
That explains so much. So they have sex, or there is a sexual molestation attack happens, and then she goes over to the male sleeping quarters and looks in to see who's got soot on his face, and she sees it's her brother, and she's absolutely fucking livid, as you would imagine. So as you do when you're angry, she cuts off her breast, throws him in his face.
Whoa!
Like, if you like these so much, ugh! And then runs off into the night with a flaming torch.
Wow.
And he's like, oh no, this is going to make me look really bad. I better go and like talk it out with her and explain myself. I don't know what he's thinking. He's got his trousers around his ankles. He's like running out of the...
Sooty face.
Yeah, exactly. He grabs a torch, but he stumbles and it's like spluttering. And she's just running way ahead. She's a much faster runner. She's just a much better person. And she runs off into the sky and becomes the sun. And he follows with his lesser light of his spluttering torch and becomes the moon.
Oh, that's such a crazy story.
You can still see it acted out, right? Because the moon is chasing the sun around the sky, and then every so often there is an eclipse, and that's when he's raping her.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, one thing we didn't get into, and maybe that's a whole other thing, but just talking about the eclipse mythology as well. Like, I've tried to educate you on the nodes of the moon before, and there are some really cool stories attached to that. And the reason we have eclipses and the reason why they're a big deal, it's like, yeah, they're rare. And there are some really cool stories attached to that. But I love this idea of that relationship between the two things. So we're not just kind of isolating the sun as a sun god and the moon as the moon goddess, let's say. There's a whole story there. And the only thing I don't like about that is
The rape?
well, the boob bit. But like, it's this thing about the moon. You're saying he has a light. It's like the moon does not have light. It's only reflected.
Oh, that's the only problem you find with this myth.
The only
Otherwise,
problem with that
it's
picture.
completely scientifically legitimate. It's weird because you're right. Like a lot of these stories that I was finding, and I just picked my favorite or the most shocking, show like the sun is the god and the moon is the goddess, or vice versa. Like they're always about the relationship between the two. But the one more moon god called Kidili, he's from Australian Aboriginal legends. He's also a rapist. He pops down to Earth. He's a moon man. He pops down to Earth to rape some human ladies. But the Wat Kujara defeat him. The Wat Kujara are like lizard men. They're like, iguanas, like the monitor lizards they have in Australia.
Yeah.
So they're twins and they're two lizard men, and they defend the women. They castrate him with a boomerang, chuck him in a waterhole. He dies of blood loss, and the women he was going to rape run off and become the Pleiades.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So that's at least there's a happy ending in that one.
Did you read any stories where the moon god was good?
Not really.
That's
no.
so weird.
But I didn't read them all.
Seriously, because my whole thing was I just assumed that the moon's a woman, and we have this thing in astrology where I'll get into this, but that the moon is lesser in some way, so that causes a lot of like distress amongst fellow female astrology people. It's like, why do we get the shit one?
Yeah.
Why isn't the moon more like celebrated? It should be equal to the sun. That kind of story. This is saying no. Let's switch the genders. And let's switch who's the good guy. No, the moon still remains the kind of negative thing. It's just that it's the gender that swaps.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
It's weird. But the moon isn't negative. Like Selene isn't negative. She's just kind of sad and wistful.
That's a good one. But like I'm just saying, even when the moon is male, it's just thought of as lesser to the sun.
I mean, yeah, it kind of is. I mean, it's smaller. It only has reflected light. It doesn't have its own light.
Sure. I mean, the thing that I learned about the science was just you just can't deny that significance of it. And anyway, I've got more to say before we kind of get into what we think of the moon really after doing all of this research.
Yeah, tell me about this whole astrology thing.
So, just to kind of put it up front, if I haven't already several times on the podcast, is that my understanding currently of astrology is that the planets aren't making stuff happen. So I'm never going to say to you, Rebecca, the moon is making you weird today.
You did say that literally this morning.
Even though I'm thinking it. But they you could say that they correlate with what is happening here on Earth, like a mirror. And we, anyway, in that sense, we're kind of tied to this, and the moon is no different. So when we see what the moon is doing, that says something that we can translate about what's happening here on Earth. Okay, so that's like one of the beliefs with my astrology stuff. The big thing is that the moon and the sun are like these two foundational bodies, like I said, that every part of what I understand astrology to be built on, they're built on that. And they're not just the moon and the sun. It's like the sun is linked to spirit, God, the permanent, unchanging one. And the moon is all the other things. So it's like body, matter, the impermanent, fluctuating, and the many. The sun is yang or masculine. The moon is yin or feminine. And these are obviously based on basically what the Greeks thought, or, at least traditions around this time, kind of, a few hundred years BCE, let's say, at least. There are other things like we look at a chart, and one of the first things we do is we say, is it the chart, was the person born in the day or the night? And depending on that, it's like, what political party do you belong to? Are you part of the moon party at night or the day party?
Oh, I see what you mean. I thought you were saying there was a direct correlation
Don't
between
worry.
people.
Not going down the political route. And the other big thing is like, which is too complex to go into, but the meanings of the houses are also kind of, they take their meaning from this, like the houses, these topics that your chart is divided into, life topics from your body to your relationships, have something either to do with the sun or to the moon. There are just so many like amazing divisions. So when you start seeing it all together, you naturally get a sense of the significance of the sun and the moon as a pair, because it's just two sides of the same coin. Symbolism of the moon. So things like, you might say the moon in your chart is where you seek or find comfort, nurturance, motherly things. It could even represent your actual mum. It could represent your physical body or your emotional body. It's a lot to do with memory, psychology, the senses, divination, mysticism, mysteries, watery places, and silver.
So it's all internal stuff, basically.
It's a lot of internal stuff, but it's a lot of like that thing to do with matter. And also to do with... I
don't really get that. What do you mean matter?
So it's...
like physical
what
things?
You're made out of, yeah.
Okay.
Because think about in olden times, it was like, it's either matter or spirit.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay,
and so the sun was spirit.
See, in my universe, and indeed I believe the real universe, everything is made of matter. So, like, saying matter as if it's part of a binary.
Yeah,
because I don't believe in spirit. I'm just like, well, that's not a binary to me. That's what's the opposite of a monory?
Yeah, well, you're wrong. So I like also looking at the phase that the moon was in when you were born. So the new moon, when it's like dark, or just being birthed, is compared to a seed in the ground. And the full moon is like when the plant is in full bloom. And so new moon babies have that kind of sense of naivety, freshness, new ideas, maybe optimism. And full moon babies are all about like sharing those ideas, connecting with others. It's like relational. I'm in the waning phase. So when it's just been a full moon, just like 30 degrees or 50 degrees out of that, it's called the disseminating phase. I like to spread ideas, distribute or disseminate ideas. So you're kind of spreading that seed. It's all like...
Oh, so in the plant analogy, it's like...
when they lose their seeds.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that nice? And I'm like, yeah, I am really interested in spreading ideas.
That's a lovely metaphor, but also you do love to pick up new ideas and you are quite creative. Like if you said, oh, I'm in the waxing moon, I wouldn't be surprised. Or if you were in the full moon, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Well, you're wrong. It's only this one. No, but what I also like about this is this idea of kind of planning your month according to, I'm only going to call it that from now on, according to the moon's phase. So if I'm in, it was obviously recently a full moon, something's just come to fruition. So maybe I've worked to complete something over the last few days, and now I'm going to start distributing it, sharing my stuff on social media. That's my next plan over the disseminating phase.
I do really like that. Yeah.
You can really... I just think it's a really lovely way to think about the way you do things.
Yeah.
I'll read, because this is one of the things I'm really liking about astrology, is that it does give you a kind of interesting take on what these things might mean. So here's a little bit from Valens. Of the parts of the body, she rules the left eye, the stomach, the breasts, breath, the spleen, membranes, marrow. Of substances, she rules silver and glass. She is of the nocturnal sect, light green in colour and salty in taste. Isn't that just so weird? It's like, you imagine it, like, I wouldn't associate any of these things with the moon unless I'd read that. Just like wet things, motherly things, light green.
I'd really like to know how people come up with this.
Like, exactly.
This is common in these books. You'll just have a list of associations with certain things, like fire is associated with, and it'll have a long list of stuff.
Yeah.
Or, like the moon is associated. It's like, how do you come up with... Is this just this author? Or have they done like a literature review and searched through all the text to find what comes up most often?
Well, people have definitely done that now, and that's kind of what we're working with now. We're working with like various authors, but I can see the salt thing, for example. The sea, salt.
Yeah, and we all know where all the water on the earth comes from.
Exactly. So, that's why it's kind of cool, because you can then go through life and start pointing at things and be like, oh, yes, the essence of the moon, which I quite like. There's just something
me too. I think
it.
it's poetic and beautiful.
So that's all I've got. Rebecca. What does the moon mean to you now?
Well, it's really funny that you were talking about the different phases of the moon and how you can sort of see them as guide points for your life. Because, yeah, I do think that is an amazing, like, it's not a bad way to think about your life. So, like I said at the beginning, in Wicca, the goddess is often represented as the triple goddess, which is waning, full, waxing, or maiden, mother, crone.
What about the dark moon?
The dark moon isn't. We don't talk about the dark moon. We shall not speak of the dark moon. I don't know. Actually, I did hear a woman talking just the other day about adding in a fourth phase to what she wanted to do was. So the idea is 3 phases of the moon, 3 phases of a woman's life. You're a maiden, then you're a mother, then you're a crone. She didn't like the idea of being a crone very much, so she said, let's shunt the crone to the dark moon and then add in the wise woman.
Sure.
But I just felt like it was a bit like, I don't want to be a crone.
Yeah,
I'm going to say I'm a wise woman because I'm not ready to. And I'm just like, well, stop dissing crones. Crones are awesome.
Pushing it back. Yeah, I agree.
So this idea is, it was basically formalized by this poet called Robert Graves, who was a massive influence on Wicca and indeed a lot of sort of occult stuff and, spirituality stuff coming out of the UK. He sort of reconstructed / made up the idea of the worship of the triple moon goddess. There is something in it, so there's some sort of historical basis, but it's a bit flimsy. So Diana, I think we mentioned her earlier, she's a Greek goddess, obviously. She was represented in 3 forms: Diana as the huntress, Diana as the moon, and Diana as the underworld. So that's kind of maiden, mother, crone. And then also Hera, another Greek goddess, she was represented as a girl, a grown-up, and a widow. Oh. So, I've got a little bit of a quote from Porphyry, the Neoplatonist philosopher, talking about Hecate. The moon is Hecate, the symbol of her varying phases and of her power dependent on the phases. Wherefore, her power appears in 3 forms, having a symbol of the new moon, the figure in white robe and golden sandals and torches lighted. The basket, which she bears when she is mounted high, is the symbol of the cultivation of the crops, which she makes to grow up according to the increase of her light. And again, the symbol of the full moon is the goddess of the brazen sandals. The brazen sandals. I would like to know what they look like. But so the idea of a goddess being worshipped in 3 different forms does pop up, but I mainly find it in Greek stuff.
Yes.
Robert Graves was like, nah, mate, it's much bigger than that. This is literally the religion of everyone in the world before things changed.
Get out.
Yeah. So this was kind of, and he wrote this amazing book called The White Goddess, which I've only read bits of. It's a beautiful text, but it's basically like, there was this time back before we did history properly, and maybe people will look back on our time and say the same thing about the historical text being written now, but people would just make up a lot of stuff and just add in loads of assumptions, and they would often be poets / historians or fiction writers / historians. They just put in loads of their own ideas, and it's really hard to trace back what they were basing on reality and what was made up. Anyway, he put together this idea of the ancient triple moon goddess, who was worshipped by people who were witches, basically. And at some point, people picked up on this, and particularly feminist people, goddess worshippers. So they really liked the idea that the original religion was a matriarchal religion that worshipped the goddess in her 3 forms. And this is how it leaks through into Wicca. Through Dianic witchcraft, which is a very sort of feminist-centered witchcraft. In fact, it's kind of like consciousness-raising circles they used to have in the 60s and 70s. I mean, you remember the 60s and 70s. Right. Not early, but, that feminist time when everyone was getting together and for the first time talking openly about the struggles they were having as women. And many of those groups also had a spiritual dimension, which, is that basically influenced very heavily the development of Dianic Wicca, which is like because Wicca is sort of gender balance most of the time. You have, in fact, Gardner, who's like I'm going off on a tangent, aren't I? Anyway, so it's generally men and women are involved in Wicca, but this particular strain is all women, and they defend their boundaries quite aggressively. But the point is, this woman called Marja Gimbutas is, she's an archaeologist, and I'm doing air quotes because she's one of these archaeologists, just like the historians, she's got her own...
She's telling stories.
Yeah, and she has her own agenda. And her agenda is she really wants there to have been a worldwide matriarchal religion that worshipped the goddess. So she picks through all the evidence that she can find and points to anything that looks even vaguely yonic. And says, look, there's another goddess, there's a goddess, there's a goddess. And sometimes it's just 2 lines carved into a bit of rock.
Well,
Well, two lines
Never
carved
mind.
into rock,
Yeah,
obviously.
I can see how her mind does this. Because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can totally
definitely.
see it.
It's confirmation bias.
Yes.
All our minds do this.
Yes.
I'm not saying she was in any way like disingenuous. I think she genuinely believes this. But actual, historians and archaeologists don't believe this. On her Wikipedia page is quoted the anthropologist Bernard Wales says that most of Gimbutas's peers believe her to be immensely knowledgeable but not very good in critical analysis. She amasses all the data and then leaps from it to conclusions without any intervening argument. He said that most archaeologists consider her to be eccentric. Which is, and I think that she sounds like a really interesting person. I've read some of her work and it's really clever and beautiful in the way she fits ideas together, but is essentially fiction. And it's fiction that's created in part as like an origin myth for feminists.
Right.
Because especially like in the 60s and 70s when women were really looking at the problem of like their situation and how they didn't like it in many aspects, for the first time like talking about it and being able to share ideas about that, you're like, is there any hope for us? Are we just stuck under the men's thumb forever? They must have been thinking. So to have this idea of like, once there was a time,
harking back to the golden era of women.
yeah,
basically.
you can see why that would be really attractive. In fact, there's Star Good, some hippie poet, I guess. She wrote a couple of lines about Marja. She wrote, I asked, what were they, our ancestors? And Marja said they were like us, only happy. It's really poignant. But yeah, so it's basically like a longing for a utopian past.
Yeah.
And this idea that it doesn't have to be this way. You can see why it's attractive, but there's this amazing, I don't know what she is, an anthropologist, something like that, Cynthia Eller. She wrote this great book, The Myth of Matriarchal Prehistory, which I've battered Kat with before, because it's one of my favourite books. She's just an amazing writer as well. I've read her books. I read her book on conscientious objectors in World War II, even though I'm not interested in it at all, just because I love the way she writes. She points out that no matter how empowering it is, it's just not true. And it's not good. I mean, this frustrates me whenever I'm involved in any kind of like vegan activism, any kind of activism for a cause I'm passionate about. I hate it when people on my side lie.
Right.
Because sooner or later it will catch up with you and then you're going to look like an idiot.
Yes.
And it's going to destabilize your whole argument.
Your foundation shouldn't be built on lies.
Yeah, exactly. So that really annoys me. And the book that you recommended to me, what was it, Mysteries of the Dark Moon by Demetra George, it has a whole fucking chapter on this. And it just represents it as if it's the truth about history.
Yeah.
And I look through to find her references, and it's all these people, like I've seen before, Graves, Gimbutas, all these like poet, historian, anthropologists. It's not... And it's so frustrating because this was published really recently, or at least it was republished, or anyway, the date on my Kindle copy is 2019. And this is still being said as if it's true. So there are people picking up this book and reading it and thinking, oh, once upon a time, there was a matriarchy and everyone worshipped the triple goddess and wasn't it great? And it's just like, I mean, it's a lovely story, but keep it to fiction, please, because it's just not true. And it just drives me insane because I am passionate about like women's rights or whatever.
But just like you're not passionate about lies.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I am passionate about lies. I hate them. And I like lies is a harsh way to say it because I don't think these people are lying. But it only takes 2 seconds to look it up on Wikipedia. Come on, if you're publishing a book today, just fact check a little bit. And then at least you can say, I think this is true, but science doesn't agree or something.
Sure.
But just to present it as if it's true, it really frustrates me. It frustrates me so much that I went to refund the book, which I do rarely. But I thought it was needed in this time, and it wasn't an option on Amazon. Usually there's an option to refund the book. I do this every so often. If I spot something that really pisses me off, where they've just said something blatantly untrue that I know is untrue, because I'm not an expert, that's what I always think, like, I can spot that there's a mistake in this, then it must be really bad, because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And also it annoyed me because I loved the first chapter, because the first chapter was all about what you're talking about.
The phases of the moon. It's
and
amazing.
how you can use them for inspiration in your life. I was like, oh, I love this lady. Oh, maybe this is the sort of woo that I can get involved in.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know what it is, chapter 3 or 4 is all matriarchal prehistory. I was like, right, I'd go straight back to Amazon with this. And no option to refund.
Well, if I meet her at an astrology conference, I'll try to get you money back.
I'm sure she's wonderful. I'm sure all these
lovely.
people are wonderful. Anyway, so all of this is to say in a roundabout way that the image of the triple goddess is really like deep in my psyche because of my my past experience as a Wiccan, and the fact that you see it all the time. Yeah. So I'm sort of trying to think of a way throughout the course of doing this research, really, of a way to make to be able to relate to that image
Yeah,
without having
relating
to,
to
yeah,
it, for
without
sure.
having to make anything up. And what I came up with is, and I said this I was doing an interview with a Skeptical podcast, and I said this, and there was like a moment of silence, and they're like, and like, oh no, I ventured too far off the beaten track. But I'm trying to think of this. So it's Maiden, Mother, Crone, right?
Yeah.
So what is the Maiden? She's all about exploration. I've got to take all the childbearing stuff out of it because I'm not interested in that. So I have to reframe the way I think about these. She's all about exploration, trying out new stuff, exploring,
Is it like new moon, first quarter moon kind of
yeah,
vibe?
it's everything up to the couple of days before the full moon, I
Lovely.
guess.
Okay.
So it's about exploration, trying new stuff. I kind of think of that as like an essential part of creativity and indeed of
Yes.
science. Like
Yes.
you've got to mess around with ideas first. The full moon is about, I'm doing like big moon gestures for Kat's entertainment now. The full moon is all about creation, right? It's that she's at her fullest point. She is at her fullest point. And I'm thinking this is about like generating an idea.
But it's
or,
like the forming part, isn't it? It's not when it's just like an idea in your head. It's like something's
yes,
coming
bringing
together.
it together. It's like, this is what I've got.
Yes.
And in the terms of, I mean, this could be like getting a picture in your head of a painting you're going to do. But I'm thinking it maybe in terms of like generating a hypothesis.
Sure, that's your hypothesis.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And then the waning moon, the crone, the crone is kind of like, you think crone, hag, scary, dark. I don't know. That's the associations a lot of people have with the idea of crones because our society is so horrible to old women. And side note, I absolutely hate it in horror movies where, for a shock factor, they have a naked old woman. Have you ever noticed that?
They've
You're not
done
into
it
horror
once.
movies.
They did it in The Shining.
They do it all the time. You just don't watch horror movies?
I just stopped watching at that point. I actually did. I've never watched The Shining beyond that point.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go. Well, they often have like an old woman just lurching across, often naked or semi-clothed, and it's supposed to be scary because why? Like, when I'm an old woman and I'm watching those movies, I'll just be like, that's not scary, that's just me getting up for a glass of drink in the night. Like, I don't know. Anyway, our society treats old women like shit, and it sucks. So the crone has a bad rep, which is exactly why this woman I was talking about earlier wants to invent the wise woman phase, which is bullshit, because what we should be doing instead is embracing the crone, because I think the crone is the skeptic. So if the mother is the creation who invents the hypothesis, the crone is the person who tests it.
And it really is. You've probably read that in the book. It's like that kind of last quarter phase is like you are refining ideas. You're finding out what the fuck was wrong and like doing them better. And I love that.
Exactly. So I think I've always been drawn, even back in the day when I was into Wicca, I've always been drawn to the darker goddesses, and I think that's because I'm a crone before my time.
I'll need to find out what moon
skeptic.
phase you're in, but I don't actually think. I think you're just actually weirdly after the new moon. I could be wrong. We'll look it up.
Yeah, let's look it up. I can't believe you didn't do that before this show. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm trying to think, and I'm not necessarily saying like at the full moon I'm going to generate an idea every full moon, but every time I look up at the moon and notice what phase it's in, I'll be like, oh, could I be exploring more, or is there something I need to generate now, or is there something I need to be skeptical about right now?
Yes.
Like having that in the sky is a little reminder of the process of how I should be thinking, basically, and how I think everyone should be thinking.
Yeah.
Explore, generate, test.
And am I doing enough of all those things?
Yeah.
I've done this other thing, and I'll maybe link to the podcast I did on it, about linking creativity to the moon phases. And you can, not scientists, but like psychologists have broken down the phases of creativity multiple times, and they map on to the moon phases so well. It's such a nice way to like design projects. Anyway,
so that's where I'm at the moment with my moon worship / acknowledgement, and I think I like the fact that I found a way to like to fit it into my life. Yeah. What about you?
So I feel like in theory the moon should be very meaningful to me. The moon is, I guess, the ruler of my rising sign. This is something.
What's your rising sign?
Cancer.
Oh,
I know.
I just make that noise whatever star sign someone says. It's amazing, and almost always they'll be like, yeah.
But also for other astrological reasons, she isn't that significant, and maybe you could read that as some like Freudian insight about my mother or something. But I'll leave that to you. But I do love the moon. I like this again has. Astrology itself has made me appreciate the moon more just as a symbol for so many things. And just looking at the moon is really cool. I love that it changes quickly enough for you to kind of, not too quick, but just enough to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And it does look magical in the sky when she's like full like that. And I like this idea of structure anyway. That's just part of how I'm wired, is that I like this idea of having a structure to hang my life on.
Yeah.
And I think the moon makes a lot of sense. In the same way, you can do it in a solar way and be like, okay, so every like sun sign month, the overall, like, because there are 12 months, but there are 13 moon cycles, like it takes 13 to match up. You could have a different project for every month. It's too long. Whereas there's something about like completing something in that 27, 28 day cycle, which is just, it feels right. And you can do it on a smaller cycle as well. So I've explored this as well. Every 2 or 3 days when the moon moves zodiac signs, you can do something either yin or something yang. So let's say you've got like a workout routine, or just like, or you're doing this, applying it to your creative projects. You can kind of go a bit harder on the yang signs that the moon is in, and you can take it a bit easier on the yin signs that the moon is in. So you can kind of keep doing this on a really, like, drilling it down.
I'm so starting to understand why you love astrology so
I'm
much.
so
and
glad, listeners. Did you hear that?
Me and Kat are the same in many ways. I mean, we're only born 2 days apart,
This is the point.
and in different years. But that thing of like structure,
Yeah.
and having signals, be like, this is the time to do this, this is the time to do that. Like, I'm a massive creature of habit. I like to go out for a walk every lunchtime at a certain time. That's like, and it makes sense for me. And even if you're the most skeptical listener out there, you must admit, New Year's resolutions.
Right.
That's a thing that everyone does. Why is that considered normal? Whereas Kat doing weird things because it's the moon.
And I think both of us, we appreciate symbolism and like visual things enough that we want it not to be arbitrary. We don't want it just to pick a random time to do something. We're like, what can we hang this on?
Yeah.
Oh, the moon. What an amazing thing. Which is also calling in like the science of the moon, because it's all of that stuff is fascinating. And also just like nature itself, which we've been talking a lot about, which listeners you have not been exposed to, but just how important nature is, I guess, to our well-being psychologically.
Oh,
Okay.
and that's another subject for debate. I think we touched on that a bit in our empaths episode, but yeah.
Yeah.
Go back and listen for nature chat.
Exactly. So can I just wrap my little thing up with a poem about the
please
moon's
do.
children? So this is about her children. All heavenly influence through me must go. Now strong, now weak, now fast, now slow. Headstrong, heedless, and half wild. If she won't be led, she's Lunar's child. Pale round faces and brown eyes. Listeners, by the way, I have a pale round face and brown eyes.
Yeah, they're kind of green.
Yeah. Cruel teeth, snub-nosed, and never wise.
Yeah,
Also
that
agree.
does
Yeah.
match.
I didn't have a snub-nosed. Easily angered, but soon consoled. I actually am. Sorry, I'll stop comparing it to myself. Short, lazy, jealous, greedy for gold. Tinkers and jugglers and students who roam, millers, bird catchers, those never at home. If you fish or swim or sail, as Lunar's child, you cannot fail. So I'm going to take up, I don't want to fish, and I think sailing would be a mission. So I guess I'll start swimming more. Mm-hmm. And then I will never fail.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Any downsides to moon worship?
I can't think of it. I mean, like anything, you could get too rigid about it, couldn't you? And you could say, the moon is waning now, so I won't do any new things. Like, I won't go out and explore new things because it's the waning moon. And I had a friend who would only get her hair cut on the
Full moon.
Yeah, I think it was the full moon.
Yeah, that's like a thing.
That's weird.
Because you cut it then if you want it to like be thick and grow.
Okay.
But I quite like that. I like this idea of, well, I need an arbitrary time to get my hair cut,
Yeah.
otherwise I'll never get it cut. So yeah, might as well pick full moon.
I mean, yeah, if it's just all in, if you're loose about it, but you could imagine someone becoming
really
very
anal.
In
Yeah.
fact, it could become like almost like an OCD thing.
Absolutely.
I've never heard of any evidence of that happening. I'm just saying potentially it could happen. Really stretching to find negative aspects to moon worship.
But the other one is like, if you did believe that accidents happen on full moons.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if that can either make you be more likely to have an accident because you're sort of imagining that you will, and you might actually be acting a bit more careless because it's like, oh, it's a full moon, of course I'm being more careless. Like
or
any
turn
of those
down
stories.
opportunities, maybe like, oh no, I can't come
Sure.
out tonight, it's too dangerous, it's a full moon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it could get a bit obsessive. That's pretty much all I've got there. As for the cacao ceremony, we could say, I recommend it. only because you guys have listened now, so you know what to expect. But if you haven't heard this podcast and you're not listening, don't go to a cacao ceremony. Doesn't make sense.
I think, I like the idea of doing something special on the full moon. Not this last full moon, but the one before, I made cookies, like white cookies. Unfortunately, we couldn't see the full moon because it was too cloudy. But I like the idea of having like a little something special you do. And I really liked just relaxing, having a drink, listening to music, having a bit of a stretch. I think that's a good thing to do. And if you're reminded to do it because it's full moon. I looked up, there's lots of suggestions online for how to do your own cacao ceremony.
Nice.
So you don't even necessarily need to go and do it with hippies. You could just do it by yourself.
Buy some Cadbury's, drinking chocolate.
Seriously, have a nice hot chocolate. Listen to some hippie music. Relax.
Right, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think having one time in the month where you do something that's, looking at the sky, maybe getting together with other, because the full moon is definitely, I would say, more of something you could do with other people. The new moon, dark moon, you might want to do it on your own. It's like not for any. Yes, there are reasons.
I'm sorry, I'm looking incredulous.
I know, and I'm like, what am I saying? No, but I do kind of think it's nice to have that balance, right?
Yeah, it's good to have things you do with other people and things. But then again, the new moon is great for stargazing.
So you want to do that with other people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, everyone loves to lie on their back and look up at the stars and, see if you can spot the constellation and get that app that allows you to know.
Only on my own.
If you do go out full moon gazing, which I definitely suggest you do, take your binoculars or your monocular. I have a monocular. It's much more practical than binoculars. And I never thought to do it because I thought these are things I use for bird watching. Right. Birds aren't as far away as the moon. They're not even going to work. But it makes a huge difference just getting out, even like something that's just designed for looking at, birds. Yeah. It's amazing. You can see the craters much more clearly, and it's a really amazing experience. I can't wait to share it with Kat next time we get a cloudless night and a full moon, which could be some time.
Yeah, we'll see.
So I really feel like this has changed my relationship with the moon. For one, now I know why the moon's there, which I didn't know before. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of figured out a way to give it sort of some kind of meaning and importance in my life that doesn't make me feel mad or like a hypocrite. Yeah. So I felt this has been a really good episode for me.
I'm a lunatic about the moon.
That's what I wanted to say in the Amazon review about that woman with the matriarchal history.
Oh, God.
But I thought it'd be too mean. But I do enjoy the pun.
Yeah, I'm sure she'd see the funny side.
So, enjoy the moon.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know with a tweet or an email. We'd really love to hear about your experiences.
Yes, please tell us what we got wrong. You can email us at hello@seekerandskeptic.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @seekerskeptic.
You'll find the show notes for this and every episode at seekerandskeptic.com.
And if you're interested, you can find my skeptically themed comics at rebeccaonpaper.com or follow me on Twitter @RebeccaOnPaper.
And I'm at yoga_astrology on Twitter. And you can find me exploring the intersection of yoga and astrology at yogaandastrology.com.
If you liked what you heard and fancy supporting the show and spreading the word, we'd really appreciate a rating and review in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you're listening.
Or just tell somebody you know about the show. Thanks for listening.